We have 9 articles tonight, so we're going to get started on time, best as we can, so that way we don't go till midnight. With that, I'm going to open the 2025 Annual Town Meeting public hearing of the Planning Board regarding articles number 37 through 46. Please note that tonight's discussion is a run-through of the Planning Board's proposed presentations and an opportunity to ask questions and get some clarification. The debate itself over the merits of the particular articles is what town meeting is for. So if we take comments and do not directly respond or rebut, that is likely the reason that it's better debated somewhere else. So with that, we will open up on the first article, Article 37. Okay.
I don't need the laptop. Good evening. Everybody hear me okay? So, no? It's on. How about now? Is that better? Everybody hear me okay? So, good evening. I'm Mark Giddings. I live at 474 Barris Mill Road, and I'm here to present an article about parking, everybody's favorite topic, okay? I'll start out by saying this warrant article is a very, very minor change to the parking situation, okay? It's improving on a warrant, a bylaw that currently exists in our system. It's tweaking it and tuning it up a little bit, okay? So if you start with, everybody see that? The amendment proposes to delete the current language under section 7.7.2.4, joint parking, with new language, and clarify section 7.7.2.7. Location actually is referring to the off-site parking, and to add a requirement that any long-term lease for any off-site parking arrangements is executed by all owners and tenants. The Planning Board is proposing this amendment because the current language is outdated, does not take into consideration how businesses and consumers operate, and does not support the economic vitality of Concord's commercial districts. Elizabeth, please. Thank you. So, what is changing? You can read the current joint parking bylaw. I won't read it for you, okay? And the proposed one permits a much broader use of this shared parking. The difference between the current joint parking and the bylaw proposal: first, the current bylaw can only be used for educational, religious, lodge, club, and indoor amusement and restaurant uses that are used jointly by banks, offices, retail stores, repair shops, service establishments, and other uses not normally open, used or operated during similar hours. The proposed bylaw would allow any use that is permitted in the zoning district for the property to take advantage of the joint parking. Current bylaw is restrictive. If you have 2 restaurants in the same area that serve breakfast and lunch, they can't use shared parking. There are 2 uses, cannot use joint parking. It's important to note that we're not increasing the use of shared parking, okay? What we're trying to do is to reduce some of the parking that's required in town without inhibiting people's ability to find parking spots. The way it is set up right now, as I just mentioned, it's limited to what can be used as joint parking. We want to broaden that. And you'll see that it shouldn't have any impact on anything because it requires some fairly stringent analysis before it's granted. And I'll show you that. Okay, Elizabeth? The current bylaw only allows a decrease in the minimum parking requirements up to 50%. What it is 2 uses, that are not open at the same time. The current bylaw does not take that into consideration, and a property owner would have to construct excessive parking, which is counterproductive to many sustainability and climate goals of the community. The proposed bylaw removes the arbitrary 50% minimum in exchange for minimum joint parking requirement based on an analysis hour by hour, or a credible combination of hours, of parking demand for the uses. This hour-by-hour analysis of the parking demand must be based upon data published through the transportation, engineering, and planning profession, or empirical parking demand data from comparable uses to be utilized where the data is found to be satisfactory by the building commissioner. The minimum allowable off-street parking spaces must be equal to the largest number of required spaces at any given time is presented in the joint parking demand hour-by-hour analysis. As part of the permitting process, the planning board may require the parking demand analysis and other evidence be reviewed by a transportation engineer hired by the town and paid for by the applicant to ensure the data is accurate and consistent with industry standards. Okay, Elizabeth? The next couple of pages illustrate the type of analysis that has to be done before a joint parking can be agreed to. There's several different examples here that show the different types of building use. The Institute of Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual has land use codes for all sorts of different types of uses and a breakdown of the required parking for those uses. The hour-by-hour analysis would take each use and figure out what is the parking demand at each hour. Here's a demand analysis for an office building. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Here is one for a shopping center. Sorry. I guess I'm too soft-spoken? Oh, okay. Here's the demand for a shopping center. Go ahead, Elizabeth. And here is one for a multifamily low-rise building. And again, it analyzes what the usage is hour by hour. So what is being added? No change in any use is permitted without review and approval by the building commissioner of further documentation that the parking will remain adequate following occupancy of the new use and receipt of an executed joint parking agreement by all parties. Reduction in the minimum parking requirement shall not pertain to individual land use where assigned parking is in effect. Not only is an hour-by-hour analysis provided when the request for joint parking is first made, it is also required if any of the uses change. Additionally, if a property owner or a tenant has assigned parking, these spaces cannot be included in the joint parking. What is staying the same? It's important to note that joint parking approval may be rescinded if it is determined that the joint use is resulting in a public nuisance or other adverse effects on the public health, safety, and welfare. That's critical that you remember that we have the opportunity to reverse this at any point in time. A written agreement is executed by all parties concerned with approval as to a form and length of time by the planning board. Again, a critical piece of this that doesn't exist now, that there has to be a written agreement between the parties. And then site plan approval has to be made by the planning board. As I said when I first started the presentation, my perspective, it's a very minor change. All we're really doing is allowing people with different types of businesses to be able to apply, not to grant, but to apply for a joint parking situation. The intent is to reduce the amount of parking that is sometimes required and alleviate that issue. Any questions? I'm sure there are. No?
Yeah, so if anyone would like to ask any questions, please step up to a mic or raise your hand online. Thank you.
It's going to be very difficult, I think, to...
Hold on. You got to...
Yeah, sorry.
No, you've got to...
That's what they're doing. They're in line to ask questions. Sorry.
And just remember, it's town rules, so please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Yes. Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Connie Levine, Stowe Street. I just have a question as like, who's driving this thing? Like, why are we looking at that? What, is there a problem, or is it builders just? I don't get why this is all of a sudden coming up.
Well, it's a good question. It's not a very big issue. We're trying to fine-tune a bylaw that currently exists. All we're trying to do is fine-tune that and add an appropriate language to it such that the joint parking people have to have something in writing, okay? The way it's set up right now, businesses have to be of a certain variety to be able to do joint parking. We don't think that makes sense. The whole town has agreed that joint parking is appropriate where it's done after a study. And we think this will expand the ability to do that. Next question.
Hi, Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. I had
I'm sorry, can you just step closer? Yeah.
closer?
Yeah, or
Yeah, we
raise it
couldn't
back
hear
up.
Up? Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry. So my question is, this article, from what I understand, expands the current use of joint parking from any use to any use in any zoning district. That's what that you're proposing, correct? Any use, any zoning district across town.
Well, we currently have a bylaw, Carol, that allows for joint parking in any district within the town. All we're saying is that it doesn't make sense to articulate this to just specific end use. It limits our ability to grant joint parking. That's what we're trying to do.
So you're
the question-
expanding it to any use. I'm just trying to make sure I'm correct on that. And then, because right now, my understanding is that it does not apply to residential or mixed-use developments. Is that a correct statement?
It has nothing to do with residential parking, Carol.
No, there's
Neither
no
one.
residential parking.
This does not apply to residential parking. This applies to business parking with the certain requirements. As you know, a restaurant required to have a parking space for every three seats in it, okay? Well, if you have a restaurant that's open from, 4 to 10, okay, and has 50 seats in it, it's required to have X number of parking spots. If next door there is a bank or something like that, or a bank can be used right now, and that's how it's done. As you know, we already do this. We did it over where Paparazzi's is, where we allow joint parking because different businesses function at different times. And after a study done by a transportation expert, it was determined that they didn't have to have as many parking locations as the zoning law would have required.
Right, but what you're
So
saying
the
is
question-
now
What's
it
the question?
applies to this, but it's going to, in the future, if we pass this, apply to any use. Any use could be combined business or residential.
No, it's not.
No, it's not ever going to apply to combined business or mixed
Carol,
use.
it applies to businesses, okay?
Business only.
This is about businesses, that's
Right,
correct.
but if you change the zoning in a district from business to mixed use, then it would apply to that district. For example, if next year the planning board went forward with mixed use in Thoreau Business District, then that
Carol,
would be any
Carol,
district.
We can't speculate on what could happen. We're based upon where the
Well, that's
reality of
what
it
you
right now.
should be looking at, because
And we're trying to make it easier for businesses to operate within our community without the high cost of parking. As you know better than I do, a parking spot costs somebody $5,000 a piece on a flat land. If they have to put it into a garage, it's as much as $60,000. That makes it very difficult for some businesses to come into our community.
So I guess my other question is about accountability and enforcement. So this requires a joint parking agreement, but it doesn't include any mechanism to ensure parking remains sufficient over time.
Absolutely. Excuse me, Carol, it does. If you listen to the presentation, if we discover either through, townspeople complaints or our own or the building commissioner that there is a problem because of the joint parking, we can change that.
Right, but I'm not finished yet. So what happens if a business changes to a higher traffic use? The proposal states the business commissioner will review such changes, but it does not explain how increased parking demand will be addressed and who is responsible if parking becomes inefficient.
First of all, Carol, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it articulates in the warrant article that any change in use requires a go before the planning board. So that if the business changes, they have to come back to us and apply for a joint parking.
Okay, my other question is, because Concord's facing such an unprecedented wave of development, we have 1,000 MBTA housing units in our village centers, 200 units at Baker Ave already approved. We have 237 units at Forest Ridge Road that were approved in April, and we have major projects like MCI, Newbury Court, 2229 Main Street, adding potentially 1,000 more units in the coming years, which represents a 61% increase in our housing stock, growing from 6,500 units to nearly 10,500 units. And even if we build only half of that, those are big numbers. So given that dramatic increase, why are we introducing parking changes that make it even easier to develop more housing before we've had time to understand the impact of what's already in the pipeline?
Is that a question that's more appropriate to the town meeting?
You don't take questions here?
Oh, of course we do.
We
I
are.
thought
We
the
are.
intent-
We do. Absolutely, Carol. I've tried to answer your questions.
Yeah, we're taking questions about the content of the presentations and the warrant article themselves. The prospective development over multiple parcels is completely outside the scope of discussing joint parking on a existing commercial site. So a tweak of an existing bylaw is not the development of Concord itself.
Well, it is, because if you change it to any use in any district, and then you come forward and look at combined business use, which the planning board already has on their docket for next year.
I'm sorry, you used the phrase that kind of spells it here. You said, and then you make a change later. That we
Well,
can
that's-
discuss that kind of thing when we're making a change later. Right now, we're talking about a very small tweak. And I'm happy to discuss the merits of that tweak that was discussed in the presentation, but going beyond and talking about whatever other parcel development and things just it isn't relevant to what we're doing.
Well, I guess you don't want to look at unintended consequences?
We absolutely do want to hear about unintended consequences of the change we're proposing now, not
Right. Well-
the change 3 changes from now.
Well, it's not 3 changes from now. You're already looking at it for next year. You have a consultant that you hired that started in January, looking at combined business to bring forward to 2026 town meeting. So you are looking at it. And if you make this change right now that says any use in any development, and we pass this because we think, oh, it's just this minor change, it doesn't mean anything, it's just a little tweak, don't worry your pretty little head, Carol, then next year, when you bring combined business forward, we open up the floodgates to development.
So, Carol, could we please debate this at town meeting as opposed to here? We've got like 11 presentations we need to do, and people are here to listen to that. We're not
Well,
trying. We're not
let
trying
other
to.
people speak, but I think the
we're
whole
not trying to
point of a public hearing is to hear from the public, not
on
tell
the-
you your PowerPoint is, you missed a word here and there. Like, you're trying to box people in so you don't have to listen to
No,
what
we're
people
not.
are
No.
saying.
Not at all. Okay. Thank you, Carol.
I'm William Andrews, 83 Grant Street in Concord. I had a question. You mentioned you could rescind the parking privileges.
That's correct.
will be very, very difficult to do once you've got a business established. And I don't see how that's practical at all. Can you explain further
course,
on that?
you know,
Because I don't think it's going to be just as easy as making the law.
Well, but I think if somebody applies for joint parking, they have to understand that that is the law, is that if they change the use, that we can rescind the joint parking arrangements. That has to be part of it.
Okay.
And I know that it could be difficult to do, but it's the law, okay? And, you know, we're not the ones that are if somebody decides to change the ownership or the use of it, they have to understand that that's one of the liabilities that they'll run into.
And they sign a document to
That's correct.
agree to that.
That's correct. Okay, we have to do that, as you can appreciate. Okay, we need to protect that so that we don't give approval for one thing and all of a sudden it changes to another thing.
Right.
Okay.
Changing is, my point is that rescinding something is very
Right,
challenging.
but that's the law. Okay, so, right. But thank you for your question.
Thank you.
So I have a clarification question. Dave
Nate?
Garrison, 53 Middle Street. So on the slides, when you had the slides up there, it looked like it wouldn't, the way it sits now, if they fulfill the obligations of the rule, it doesn't have to go before planning board?
Yes, we have site plan review, absolutely.
You have
And
site
they
plan
still
review.
we still have to agree to the joint parking.
So they still have to go through all that. So
That's
the
correct. Well,
change is what? I
That-
don't understand the change in the process that you're trying to pass here.
All it really does is change, sir, is that we're opening it up so that the way it is right now, it's only between like banks and retail or banks and coffee shops. We're saying that if two coffee shops or two restaurants can apply for joint parking and prove to us by an analysis by a transportation expert that they have ample parking in a shared relationship, then they can apply for joint parking. The way it is right now, it's only between one set of industries and another set of industries. And so that's why we consider it to be a fairly minor tweak to it. Did I explain that?
I think so, but when you say a restaurant, there can be many different types of restaurants.
Yes.
I say that as someone who lives right next to what is now the Karma Late Night Party.
I know.
And it used to be
I know.
La Provence Breakfast Lunch.
Right, right.
So, you know, the same industries aren't even the same.
No, but that's a change in ownership, and that would require a change.
So if
okay?
someone has a property and they have this stuff in place, and then they sell the property, and the lease ends, somebody new comes in, it's basically a restaurant in a restaurant, they would go through this process?
That's correct.
So the landlords won't be able to rent until they go through the process,
Well, they can rent, they're just not going to be granted joint parking until they go through the process.
which means they won't have an OC permit?
Well, they can get an occupancy permit if they have the correct amount of parking, okay? Which, for a restaurant, as I just mentioned, is a parking spot for every 3 seats. If they don't have that, then they're not going to get an occupancy permit.
Okay. I just want to understand that clarification.
Yeah. Did I-
What triggers this? So every time a store changes over right now,
Right.
they have to go through this process if
If-
it's a change.
If
but
they have
if
joint...
it's not a change,
that's
then
right.
they don't.
If they have joint parking. But not everybody has joint parking.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Okay, so, good question.
Hi, I'm Dick Cross. Jenny and I have been homeowners in Concord for now. it's kinda
Address,
hard-
sir? Address?
Say again, 38 Academy Lane. We've
Thank you.
been homeowners in Concord for now really very close to 50 years, and for 40 years at the corner of Middle Street and Academy Lane. And after 6 years in Concord, I was asked to join the planning board, which I ended up chairing. Then I followed up with a stint on the Board of Zoning Appeals, so I know how difficult this job is and what it's like to be sitting here at 1 o'clock in the morning arguing. And then a few years after that, I was asked to be one of 5 members, all senior to myself, who drafted Concord's first land use plan, very first land use plan. And I knew something about that. I'd been to architecture school. We talked to a lot of people about that plan at that time. And the sentiment in town was absolutely crystal clear and unambiguous. When we asked people, what do you care about Concord? There were 2 things that absolutely came out. One is we want to preserve the small town historic character of Concord because it's important for America. And number two on that list was we want to protect open space. Now, we moved up here from Virginia. We'd been sort of enamored with Williamsburg. We'd spent a lot of time close to that. And we house sat in Concord for the first summer and looked around and said, this is the most comforting, inspiring place we've ever been, and we want to live here. And we've been here for 50 years. We've raised 2 kids that have gone to local schools and all of that. And I think it's about the past 15 years, what we have seen, and I don't want to talk about all the mechanics of this bylaw, but what we have seen is a substantial erosion of that character that for about 235 years was the signature, the personification of our town and our responsibility to America. And it has come, excuse me, are you about to interrupt me?
No,
Great,
not
thanks.
at all. No, go right ahead.
Thank you.
No.
Although I would just appreciate if you, excuse me, sorry.
It came gradually recognizing that there are changes in people's
Sorry,
views
excuse me.
of what's right and wrong.
I just would like you to please speed up a little bit. We're
Speed up a little, okay.
yeah,
great.
just we've got a lot of people behind you and a lot more stuff
So
to
here's the
discuss.
bottom line. We see the 235-year heritage of Concord that a lot of us have carried in our hearts for a long time, coming apart right now, being eroded continuously. And all of the evidences that Carol has written about, we are strongly behind because we live right in the middle of that. I'll tell you, Karma coming along, the granting of 75 parking spaces to Concord Academy has changed the character of our neighborhood and the character of that part of town. We think there's a time when we have to decide, do we want to preserve the 250-year legacy of what this town meant until about 15 years ago, or do we want to walk away from that? And at some point, we've got to decide we care more about the past and about the future than we do about right now. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening. My name is Mary Hartman. I live at 16 Concord Green. I'm the chair of the select board, speaking on my own behalf. I have a comment or a suggestion. I understand that planning bylaws are very detailed, and I understand that you've got to think of all of the what's and buts, but it would be helpful to me if I understood what problem we're trying to solve here or what improvement we're trying to make. And if I understand it correctly, we've got a problem as far as some of our commercial or retail tenants having trouble turning over storefronts. And if we think of how does that mesh with the overarching goals of Concord, by Concord I mean big Concord, and how did we articulate those and envision Concord, and how have we articulated those in the select board goals and the planning board goals, and how do they align? How does this change align with those overarching goals? I think that would be a good message or a connection to make when you're presenting this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see we have a hand raised online. I don't know who can handle turning that on. Is that you, Elizabeth? Or? Okay. Betsy Oslam, sorry, it's very far away from me, but if you want to go ahead.
I apologize.
You're
Betsy
good.
Olson Mikowski, 1741 Wedgwood Common. I think, as I understand it, this is just to try to help remove some of the red tape that businesses face. Sorry, my family is noisy. Some of the red tape that businesses face when they try to go into a new building. And we've had several businesses in West Concord that have been emptied for a really long time. And I don't know, part of what we love about Concord is how vibrant it is. And so I think this is a really good move. I think it's one of those very incremental moves. And if people really think about it, I think the way that Mary was talking about it and how it fits into the overall vision for the town, they'll find that it's a positive move. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Robin Garrison, 53 Middle Street. I have a question about the process here tonight. I know you want questions about the presentation, and I was very interested as to what Mary Hartman asked you about what precipitated the change. So I just want to know, are you going to take all of our questions and then answer them later, or are you going to answer them as they come along?
Well, we are answering them right now. You know, what the purpose of this is to make sure that we have looked at this process from your viewpoint and to see if there are any questions that we haven't thought about as we wrote this warrant article, okay? That's really what we're trying to accomplish tonight. We're not trying to debate the warrant article. That happens at town meeting. We're trying to see if there's some information or some thoughts that would be articulated to us tonight that we haven't presented. Now, obviously, Mary did a great job of looking at it from 30,000 feet, okay? And perhaps we should have done it that way. I didn't think it was a big deal. I thought we were just making a minor change to a warrant article, bylaw that's already in existence that will make it a little bit easier for our commercial people to be able to run their business, okay? Understand that the parking situation overall is a huge deal, okay? And a number of communities have done away with parking regulations completely, okay, to alleviate this. We can't do that. We are still an auto-centric town, okay, and we still need to be able to regulate parking, okay? But we need to make sure we're looking at it in an up-to-date fashion and where we can to make slight changes so that it doesn't hurt the fabric of our community, but perhaps makes it a little bit easier for our businesses to operate.
And one thing I'll note is Mary did bring up a good point that we're deep in the weeds when it comes to this stuff, and part of this is we have seen joint parking and how it has played out, and this is a response to, hey, it would be great if we had more tools. The joint parking, for example, over where Paparazzi's being rebuilt, there was a discussion of it's good they had a mix of a coffee shop, a bank, a restaurant, and a fast casual, because if it wasn't all of these specific uses, but instead was 2 doctors' offices, well, then they couldn't have joint parking. We're saying, well, why couldn't they? What's the justification for that if it's a reasonable development? We want the tools to be able to look at it holistically. But the way the regulation is written right now, unless a bank's in the mix, it's really hard to do. So that's sort of the justification.
And it's based upon an analysis by a professional. It's not because somebody said, oh, we're going to share our parking. That's not it, okay? It has some teeth to it.
Okay. And
Okay.
on that note, you had a chart on the,
Yep.
was that posted online, or is it somewhere? Because I haven't seen that before, and I couldn't really read it because it's so small.
We added it to the presentation because we wanted to be able to show you, the analysis, because we think that's important, that people understand that this isn't a
it is.
capricious thing, okay? And it's done by a professional.
Right.
If it isn't on there, we'll make sure it is on there, okay?
Okay. I would like the chance to look
Yep,
at that.
you bet.
The presentations will be posted on our
It will,
website.
okay.
Yep.
Okay,
On the town meeting website, yes.
okay. My other question is, if you want to limit me, that's fine, just.
It's fine. Go ahead.
This will be my, well, it's not my last one, but you say to utilize joint parking if it can be clearly demonstrated that larger levels of off-street parking are not required. How will that be demonstrated, and is it demonstrated to you or the ZBA? Like, who?
No, it's done, it's presented to us, but it's done through an analysis, okay? They hire a transportation parking specialist that goes in and does a study of what the parking requirements are hour by hour.
So
And that's what we tried to show you.
the town hires them, they pay for them. That's
Right.
just, I wanted to
Okay,
clarify
so the
that.
town, so when a new business
Applies for joint parking. Right.
applies for the joint parking, then it triggers the town to do the study
And
and
charge the
and
applicant.
charges the applicant.
That's correct.
And then you make your findings, and then is the public able to weigh in on that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because it's done in an open planning board meeting.
It is, okay.
Sorry, so we don't misstate, I just got corrected. The applicant would hire a transportation consultant and engineer, and the town would hire someone to peer review that to make sure it was done in an appropriate way.
To validate the facts.
Yes.
Okay. And my next question, I might be getting ahead of myself, but if you could, when you get to it, Article 44.
You are
What's
getting
the
ahead of
You're
yourself.
ahead of yourself.
We'll get there
We'll
later.
get to
Okay,
that.
but please make sure you explain what the difference between the two is, because I can't, I don't know what that is.
Yes,
So,
we will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith Bergman, 56 White Avenue. For the moment, a member of the Town Meeting Study Committee. And just, if the memo didn't go around, I just wanted to impart to FinCom, you're the first in the round of public hearings we're having this time. And one of the recommendations of the Town Meeting Study Committee is that more debate and discussion occur at public hearings so that the first time issues come up is not town meeting. And so to the extent that, and I'm sorry if that message didn't get out, it's out now, that in order for the time of town meeting voters to be better spent and to be better prepared, the extent to which these public hearing processes can identify issues that will come up at town meeting, and you know what the answer is, and you can address them, maybe even amending articles. And so I appreciate all of the time that the planning board has spent to get us this far. A lot of good give and take tonight, but maybe it needs even more. Thanks.
Linda Neiman, 59 Mallard Drive. I'm co-coordinator of Mothers Out Front Concord, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. I would like to thank the Planning Board for bringing this article forward. I think it's a wonderful idea. It provides, as Betsy said, flexibility in the town and vibrancy. Right now it's very restrictive and there's no flexibility for businesses to change. They do change, they have to have a new, larger parking. We simply don't have more space for more parking. Parking is an impervious surface, which contributes to a lot of the flooding that's in town. And with climate change, we're going to see more and more flooding. Warm air holds on to more water, and we'll see a deluge of it. I would recommend, like in your example, with the hourly usage, to illustrate the flexibility of two businesses that operate at different hours. For example, coffee,
Which we can certainly do.
Restaurants.
It's a good point. I mean, certainly, as our chairman mentioned, we learned that with the paparazzi rebuild, okay? That's a perfect example of it, okay?
And also to illustrate that this would assist revenue-generating businesses. I know in town there's a lot of discussion on the heavy tax burden here, and this would help a lot if we can make it easier for businesses to take up space that are currently empty. Thank
Good.
you.
Thanks for your comments.
Sven Weber, 50 Belknap, speaking on my own behalf. I have two questions. One, unfortunately, I have to bring up 44 because these articles are or potentially are connected. My question is, in the scenario where Article 44 goes through, would that change the intention of this article that there is a review when there is a change of tenant? Because Article 44 asks for if there's a change, if there's not a change in terms of footprint change, and there is no review ever again of that of the parking requirements. So, is Article 44 overriding in a certain way the review you still have?
No.
If you only do 37, or is 37 overriding 44? I just want to get a clear answer on this.
37 pertains to joint parking, okay? So, and it only pertains to joint parking. So if there is a joint parking agreement and there's a change in ownership, it's got to come before us for review.
Okay, and that is not overwritten by 44. That's just on the record.
That's correct.
I just want to have it on
Yeah,
record.
no, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So second is, I think still, you're playing on a lot of screws here with the different articles with respect to parking.
Right.
I would have wished we would have a comprehensive parking analysis of what is needed in Concord before we start playing around. Because if we do that and then we have to go back and change things again, it would have been a much better and smoother process today based on a comprehensive parking review. These are, let's say, the 7 screws we have to play to optimize. And I would have loved to see that, because at the moment we are just working in a silo.
We would love to be able to do that, and we've actually looked at it by all the different industries. We had a consultant come in and look at all of our different parking requirements, and most of them we didn't think were appropriate to change, okay? It doesn't mean we don't need to change parking. We certainly do, okay? And I think we would love to have the kind of study you're talking about done by the town, and maybe someday we can, but that isn't what we had right now. What we had right now is a small tweak to our current bylaw.
I'm just concerned that small
It's a very,
tweaks.
yeah, because parking is a big issue, as I said. A lot of towns, particularly more metropolitan areas like Somerville, they've done away with parking completely, okay? We can't do that,
Okay, thank you.
okay?
Charlie Parker, 105 Chestnut Street. I have a kind of a high-level question that has to do with the impact of these changes. And parking is a scarce item, so you've got supply on the one hand, you've got demand on the other. And I'm just wondering, what your sense is on the sort of, let's say, medium-term impact of these changes. And I think that ought to be made clear to people. Is it, parking neutral? Does it create more demand for parking? Does it create less demand for parking? I know we're trying to smooth out some of the issues associated with permitting and that sort of thing, but what does this do to our parking situation? When I drive into Concord Center, parking's tight. I'd like to know that, or think that, the optimizations we're doing as a planning board, are having some sort of positive impact on that situation. Is this on the plus side? Is this on the negative side? What does it do for our supply? What's it do for demand and so forth? That ought to be made clear to people.
Yeah, it's a good question, okay? It's probably not going to impact downtown Concord at all, okay? There's very little opportunity for joint parking. There is some within the church over here leases some of their parking to the building over there, okay? There's a little bit of that goes on, but there really isn't a lot of space to do that, okay? I think
Yeah, we don't need to focus just on this area,
Right.
though. Anywhere that it's scarce, people ought to know what the impact is on the supply and demand side of parking, because there's a lot of cars around, parked
Right.
virtually everywhere,
Right.
on all the streets, at all times. It's tight. So we hope that
I don't see why it would change the parking that happens on the street right now. I don't see that changing, okay? I see it making it better use of parking that's currently available where it's appropriate.
Thank you.
Okay. Say again. On private property, yes, yeah. Thank you.
Carmen Reese, 52 Devon Street. I'm the moderator. Quick suggestion. I think it would be helpful to folks. The Warren article doesn't include the language of the section that's being replaced. And I think that in the materials that go into the town meeting briefing book, by the way, everyone is going to get a town meeting briefing book in the mail this year, and it's going to have all the material about all the articles in there in one place, with the motion, another recommendation to the town meeting study committee. So look for that. I think it would be helpful to have the text that's being replaced so that people can compare it if they wish. Thanks.
Thank you, Carmen.
Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap. I had a follow-up question. I'm still a little confused. Article 37 requires a parking review for any change in use that relies on shared or joint parking. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So Article 44, on the other hand, says no parking review is needed at all, even for those same joint parking spots, if it's a business-to-business change or a conversion to mixed-use residential. So which rule applies?
If they have joint parking by bylaw 37, the warrant article 37, they're going to have to come before the planning board, Carol.
No, I'm still confused. Article 37 says if you have a change in use
That's correct.
and you want shared or joint parking, you have to go to the planning board and get a review or, justify it. But Article 44 says if it's a business-to-business change or a conversion to mixed-use residential, then no parking review is needed at all. So that could be even those same joint parking spots. So if mixed-use residential or business-to-business change uses joint parking, and they say, well, it's a business-to-business change, or I'm converting to mixed use,
Carol,
and I don't need a parking review because Article 44 says it's a business change of use. And therefore, if I have on-site parking or if I have joint parking, I don't need a review.
So, Carol, would you bring that up with Article 44? I'm telling you that Article 37 stipulates that a joint parking, change in ownership, change in usage requires planning board approval.
I understand that what 37 says, but
Well,
the
but-
other one contradicts that.
Right now, we're just
So
talking
you want to
about-
wait till 44 and I'll bring it
that's
up?
correct.
Okay, I'll
Yep.
bring
Thank
it
you.
back up again.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Lisa Resnick, 45 Laurel Street. Thank you for all the time you're spending with us and letting us go through this. My comment is on the presentation. I came in not knowing as much as most of these people, but with the presentation, I feel like I understand it less. It was so, I was so confused. I felt like I had to take algebra again. There was some things there, and the charts were so small, and I didn't have any reference point for the charts, so I couldn't see them very well, and I didn't know what they were explaining.
So you're giving me a bad grade on my presentation, is that what you're saying? So I apologize if we didn't make it clear. Okay, as Andrew said, we get in the weeds on these things. I mean, I've spent 2 years on parking, okay, not just on this, but on parking in other areas, okay? We've had a number of meetings on it, okay? So I guess I understand what I'm trying to accomplish, and if I didn't make that clear to everybody, then I apologize. As I said when we first came out, we see this as a very small change to make it easier for businesses to be able to find the parking spots that they need without impinging upon the residents' ability to park where they want to, okay? And that's how we perceive it, okay?
Okay. The one other comment was, I appreciated that some other people asked for clarity on why this change is being brought up now, and I thought it would be nice to have clarification on that at the beginning, too.
Because we're trying to just make any small changes that we can to parking to be able to help the businesses, okay? And we felt this was a fairly insignificant change to the bylaws.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's Casey Winslow from Lindsay Pond Road, 160. And so I think what Carol was saying about the going to the planning board or not, have to go for another review. What you're asking town meeting to do right now is to approve it so that the planning board has the say, as opposed to changing the bylaw right now. Right now, we have the say. We'd be putting it in the hands of the planning board in the future to review.
No, not at all. I mean, because the way it stipulates right now is that in order to apply for joint parking, they still have to come before the planning board. They have to justify it. It can only be between two specific industries. They can't be the same industry and apply for joint parking. So it doesn't change that at all. It doesn't.
But if there's a problem, that's what we talked about. If there's a problem, like how do you unring the bell? Like how do you reverse what we put in action here? Then it needs to go in front of the planning board for a review.
That's correct.
That's the difference. We're changing the zoning bylaw that takes it out of town meeting's hands. And
No, I
we're,
guess
you
I
know,
don't-
putting
I'm
that
just
I
not
guess I
sure.
don't understand.
Can you just explain the concept of in town meetings hands? Right. I'm confused
We're
because.
making a decision whether the town meeting
But right now,
wants to allow this.
the town doesn't approve specific projects at town meeting.
No, I know that, but I'm saying we're changing the zoning. That's what we're talking about, changing the zoning here.
Right.
And once you change the zoning, you've kind of opened the floodgates for things to occur that may or may not be intended by the zoning bylaw change.
Yes. Yeah.
Correct.
Then I think if at town meeting, people don't agree that this is a change that warrants our attention, then they won't vote for it, okay?
That's exactly right, but I'm just bringing it to the
we thi-
attention of
we
everybody.
thi-
This is our chance.
We think
to-
it has merit, or we wouldn't have brought it before you, okay? If I haven't articulated that clearly enough for everybody to understand what we're trying to do, then I apologize for that, okay?
No,
But-
I didn't say that you didn't. It's
Okay.
just, a lot of people have asked, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? And, it feels to me like we're creating more problems than solving. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks for your
We
comments.
have an online comment. It's Ed Nardi, please.
We also have 11 things to get to tonight.
Yeah, just a quick perspective. Ed Nardi, 29 Academy Lane. Perhaps in that rare occasion when the planning board, if there's an issue with joint parking, and the planning board decides to rescind the agreement, what happens to those two businesses that have the joint parking in the sense that they won't meet zoning bylaws? Are the businesses, in danger of not going forward with their business at that point in time? Just a question.
Yeah, it's a good question, Ed. They have to meet the law. And if the law says that, they can't get joint parking, then they can't get joint parking.
And thus they wouldn't be able to continue to do business at that point in time?
They may have to make some sort of adjustment to their business. We've seen it in town where businesses have reduced shifts because they don't really need 4 people there at the time. They can get by with 3, and therefore the parking works. Things like that can happen. So businesses can make adjustments as needed, is the simple answer.
Okay. I would just note that it might be harder for restaurants to make adjustments to businesses versus other type of businesses.
Or they
if
can
you
take
will.
out tables.
Noted.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's true. Okay. Thank you.
Robin Garrison, 53 Middle Street. Sorry, one more question. You said that, I agree with the person that was here before me. I thought I understood everything. I've been reading it all along, and I'm even more confused than before I came. So, to help me understand, you stated that this joint parking amendment would not affect Concord Center. I don't understand that. Why?
It applies only to private parking, not
Private,
public.
okay, can you give examples? What does that mean by private parking?
A parking lot for the church over there, or something like that. Not the public parking, not parking on the street, none of that, okay? Private parking.
So if the church added something, can you just give that's still a C.
Sure, yeah, I think
example
Andrew's,
I've always thought of, sorry.
Andrew's comment about paparazzis is an excellent one, okay? Whereby, we could only do joint parking between non-competing or these two industries. So we could do it with a bank or with a coffee shop, okay? But if there were 2 similar restaurants or 2 similar they couldn't do joint parking. All we're trying to do is say, if they can prove that they don't compete for parking at the same time through a study, then that they should be allowed to do joint parking and thereby reduce the amount of parking space that they require, the amount of asphalt they need to do, the cost of that building.
Okay, so private parking. So West Concord, Concord Center, this does not apply because everything, the on-street parking, all that
Nothing
is
to do with it.
public. Okay.
It does apply to some of those, but not all. That's
Okay,
what it comes down to.
That's
So,
which-
for example, and this is the example I always think
Yep.
of, the bookstore would like to put a cafe in. They would need to figure out parking for those employees. They come up with an agreement with Fritz and Gigi's, which has a private parking lot, to park those employees. All of a sudden, they would like to turn the entire bookstore into a restaurant. That would be a change that they would not be able to just continue and plow through and keep going because they have some sort of joint parking. The joint parking has to match the actual use they're doing. So you could unring the bell because they've changed the business.
And in answer to your original question, It's unlikely to apply in Concord Center because there is so little private parking available. There are a few little spots, but so few.
Okay, so Fritz and, the small lot behind Fritz and Gigi is not considered public?
Right.
It's
private.
the other one that's shared. Okay, so for instance, Kai's Road, the Concord Market, and the business there. So if something else were to go in, then that would be considered joint parking?
Yes, if Concord Market redeveloped and changed their business mix and wanted to reduce the amount of, they didn't want to add more parking on top of their deck, they could come before you and say there's a justification that these two businesses do not operate at the same times and they can share parking. But that's, it's a private thing. It's not saying that this business it's different than parking relief, which some businesses apply for related to just not having any parking at all. Those businesses on Thoreau Street, for example.
Okay, so this basically makes the argument that you wouldn't have to go to the planning board, or it makes the argument that you have justification?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It gives us the tools
Okay.
to do what we've already been doing better,
Okay.
basically.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Newmeyer, 61 Belknap. I was just questioning parking studies, and if you look back in history the last few decades, there's been a movement for smart growth, where people don't have a car, don't drive, and there's been a huge movement for that. And what I've noticed in parking studies in the movement is they're trying to apply what works in the city to the suburbs.
Right.
And so I was just checking if you check on those underlying assumptions and if there's any bias in the consulting.
As Mark mentioned, we did review these types of sort of incremental changes. This little thing doesn't need 3 spots, it can only be 2, but we felt that was inappropriate based on what the information we had and the role we're actually taking. So this is more of a tweak about how existing businesses can prove that they don't generate those kind of businesses based on industry standards, not removing, like saying, oh, actually 3 parking spaces for a restaurant is inappropriate, we're going to go to 2. We're not proposing to make those kind of dramatic changes that some other municipalities are doing. As Mark mentioned, we're car dependent. It just is what it is right now.
Okay.
And
I just wanted to check on the underlying assumptions.
It's a good comment, okay, but we don't.
Well, I've just seen it applied in other parts. In
Right.
Oregon, there's a bunch of suburbs they've tried to do smart growth, and people drive a car in the suburbs.
Right. Yeah. No, we are auto-centric. There's no question about it. We're not going to be able to get rid of our cars.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Connie Levine, Stowe Street. I'm thinking of all the discussion that's been going on about commercial businesses coming into Concord, trying to, resolve tax issues. And I really wonder if there's really something like that driving this, because it just seems a little skeptical to me, that all of a sudden, these de minimis problems are resulting in this change in the parking. And I feel that maybe there's a bigger thing here that we're not really being told about. And so I'd be very cautious of this, because it just doesn't make sense. Like if you stood up there, and say like, okay, well, this doctor works here and this you can't doctor. I mean, those things, it seems like you should be able to find a way of fixing those minor problems. But I think it's something bigger than that. When you talk about joint parking and you're talking about commercial development beyond what we've ever had with the MCI and everything. So I really want you to be honest with the Concord people and tell you what's going on here.
Well, thank you, Connie. We're all Concord residents as well, okay? And I can tell you that all we're trying to do is make a small tweak to a bylaw that already exists.
Right. So, the planning board's saying they're making this small tweak, and because the joint parking regulations are too restrictive. So I've been to every planning board meeting in the past 5 years, and I have not heard a single developer business owner or resident requests these parking changes. The only groups that have brought it up are the planning board and the EVC, not the community. So my question is, which meeting in the past 5 years did a developer, a business owner, or a resident come before the planning board and ask for joint parking changes or change of use?
That's the question?
That's a question. When was it? I was at every meeting. I never heard it.
Why does it require that before we try to make a change in the bylaw, Carol? Okay, all we're trying to do is facilitate our bylaws such that they are perhaps easier for people to live with. We saw this, as I've said several times, as a minor tweak, okay? All we're doing is trying to open it up so that it's not restricted between two different businesses. We don't see this as a big deal. Okay.
Right, but the businesses are not saying it's a big deal. The developers are not saying it's
But
a
they
big
come
deal. The
Carol,
residents are saying it's not a big deal.
They come before us and don't get approval because it can't happen, okay? And we're saying that if we allow this to be a bylaw, that it perhaps will make things easier. Are we going to get inundated with people trying to do this? I don't know, okay? But we thought it was worth trying to tweak it.
Right,
okay?
but that's one of the unintended consequences that people are
What
talking about.
unintended?
You
I don't
need to be
understand.
prepared for that.
What unintended consequences? It's pretty specific. It's going to be the bylaw, okay? People have to abide by the bylaw.
Right. the
Just as they do
unintended
now with the joint parking arrangement, okay?
The unintended consequences are when a developer comes and says, I want to build this, and you say you need 100 parking spots or whatever it is, and the developer says, I don't have that, and then you say, oh, well, you can offload it to joint parking, and therefore you don't have to put parking on your new development. That is the unintended consequence. Underlying, that's what's going on.
Thank you for your comments.
I'm Terry Ackerman, Heathbridge Road. I'm on the select board, but speaking for myself, I have a suggestion for this article, and I have a feeling it's going to be the same suggestion for your other articles. I would say for the presentation, the first thing you want to do is say, what is the purpose of the article? As Mary was saying, why are we doing this? Then the next thing would be like a side-by-side, like, what do we have now versus what is this? Instead of just saying it's a small tweak, just show it. This is what it is now.
I thought we had. One of the slides shows the two different articles, okay?
Good.
The current
That's
one
what we need, because I have to
was
say...
in the presentation.
And any table that you have with small numbers, make it big enough, please, because...
That was just done as an example of what the
Yes, I
study
know,
that
but
has to be.
then people get
Okay.
upset because they can't read it.
Okay, all right.
So just, those are my suggestions,
Okay.
just
Thank
to
you.
make it real simple, like, this is the purpose, this is what we have now, this is what we're going to have if it passes, and here's an example that you can read.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank you.
Terry.
And with that, we'll move on to the next amendment, or the next article, Article 38, so, which is general housekeeping.
Thanks. Wait, I don't have notes view. Is there notes view? I can just look at there. Oh, well, there's no notes, but I can just wing it. But I can also just look at that. My pen's in the way. No presenter view. I can wing it. It's fine. Okay, then I don't even need this. I'll just look at the screen. Okay. Okay, do you want to go to full screen? Yeah. Okay, Article 37 was fun, but now prepare yourselves for some real excitement, housekeeping amendments. So you might have thought oh, okay. Sue Felshen, 19 Sunnyside Lane, member of the Planning Board. Article 37 took an hour, but prepare yourself for something really long and exciting, housekeeping amendments. We've got about 5 pages worth, but they're all something along the lines of fixing the position of the word "and" in a list when the list changed, or moving a comma from the wrong place to the right place, or in this case, well, you don't say a portion of lot is located partially, because if it's a portion, it's already partially. It's just redundant. All of these are changes along these general lines in order to make minor cleanup to our zoning bylaw. Yes, in this case, we have a punctuation problem and the wrong preposition was used. Now, is there another example? Nope. So I would be very happy to entertain any questions about specific corrections to the zoning bylaw if anyone really wants to make it, ask any questions or any general comments or questions about this article. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Seeing none and none online, we'll take that as a world record and move to the next agenda item, which is Article 39. That's a zoning bylaw amendment, and I'll wait for Elizabeth to pull it up. And I apologize in advance for my very weird posture when I'm reading this off of my screen here with the mic. Yep, perfect. Okay. This amendment is intended to accomplish 7 goals, some of which came about as a result of discussions with the building commissioner, and some of which came about as a result of changes in state law. The current bylaw allows the Zoning Board of Appeals to grant a special permit to allow an ADU on an undersized lot. The first change would expand this to also allow the ZBA to grant a special permit to allow an ADU on a lot with less than the required frontage, and requires that in the case of an undersized lot or a lot without sufficient frontage, the lot must be a legal non-conforming lot, not just a random parcel that's left over. A legal non-conforming lot, a lot is a legal non-conforming lot if, when it was created, it met the current zoning standard, but since that time it no longer does due to changes in zoning. A legal, non-conforming lot has a certain protected status under the state zoning bylaw and is therefore treated differently than a non-conforming lot which does not otherwise meet dimensional requirements or did not meet dimensional requirements when it was created. As you can imagine, there are many legal non-conforming lots in Concord, and each year we make the zoning bylaw amendments to address particular concerns, but it can result in changing a particular lot's status. The second change clarifies sorry, this all froze up. This clarifies that an ADU by right must meet the required dimensional setbacks for a dwelling on the same lot and location for any other provision. So that's the second one. Third clarifies that a change in intent over time. A 2020 bylaw amendment allowed the construction of ADUs in existing and proposed structures. Before that, you could only have an ADU in an existing single-family dwelling that was built and occupied for more than 2 years. This change makes it clear that the prior build and occupancy requirements are gone. And then the next 4 items are designed to bring Concord's zoning bylaw into compliance with the 2024 amendment of the State Zoning Act. The new law requires communities to allow, by right, ADUs which meet certain requirements. Oh, I did? What did I skip?
Square footage.
Oh, did I? No, I'm getting there. Sorry, that's this is Amendment 4, which has to do with the size of the ADU. The current bylaw allowed by right is up to 750 square feet, and an ADU up to 1,000 square feet by special permit from the ZBA. The new state law requires a town to permit ADUs by right up to 900 square feet. The planning board is proposing an amendment which exceeds the state minimum by allowing an ADU by right up to 1,000 square feet and removing a special permit provision. The reason for the increase of 100 square feet is twofold. The first, the planning board didn't feel it was reasonable to ask property owners to go through a special permit process for an additional 100 square feet and build an ADU which better fits their particular needs. And second, it puts the ZBA in a position where it has to make a finding that the 100 square feet is or is not a substantial detriment to the neighborhood. And then number 5, the 5th and 6th items are additional specific requirements now required by state law. For item 6, I will note that the only transit stops in town are the Concord Center and West Concord's commuter rail stations. And the 7th Amendment is just to make the town's bylaw consistent with the State Zoning Act, which uses the term accessory dwelling unit, not additional dwelling unit. And with that, I will open up to questions. Cool. Oh, no, we do.
Sven Weber, 50 Belknap, speaking on my own behalf. Can we go to that ADU thing with the 1,000 square foot slide again? And I'm more like, because I do that on a business stuff typically, I try not to repeat regulations that are at a higher level in typically my own company's bylaws, that if a regulation changes on a higher level, I have to change always the bylaws. Is there a way just to refer to the Massachusetts law and their 900 square foot? And if Massachusetts goes in like 5 years from now and changes their 900 to 1,020, we don't have to go back to town meeting again? Can we just cross-refer and say whatever Massachusetts says, that's what we are doing? I just don't want to avoid that if there's some change there again in Massachusetts, you have to go back to town meeting again. That's the only thing.
I understand that, yeah. I understand what you're saying. But right now, we're actually going beyond what Massachusetts requires. That's part of what the discussion here is.
I think Sven is suggesting that we say state minimum or 1,000 square feet, whichever is larger.
For example, something like that. Just that you're not, again, in a couple of years, have to go back again for a few square foot.
Thank you. That is actually something we can consider. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And if there's no other comments, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is number 40, the zoning map floodplain conservancy district.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rob Almeida. I'm 20. Sorry. Good evening, everyone. I'm Rob Almeida, 28 Comerford Road. Article 40, zoning bylaw amendment, section 2.2. Sorry.
That's why I was sitting there.
Yeah. Okay, I apologize. I'm Rob Almeida, 28 Comerford Road. Article 40, zoning bylaw amendment, section 2.2, the zoning map floodplain conservancy district. So the proposed amendment and reason, this amendment updates the floodplain conservancy district boundary as a result of an alteration by FEMA to the flood insurance rate map and flood insurance study for the Merrimack watershed. The amendment to the floodplain conservancy district boundary is necessary for the town to remain in compliance with requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program, so property owners are eligible to purchase flood insurance. Go to the next slide. The area of the boundary changes is limited to the Merrimack watershed, which is located around Virginia Road. The change is primarily a reduction in the extent of the 100-year floodplain made by FEMA. The impact of this revision on existing structures of 4 properties, the example on the right, have the floodplain getting closer to the structure but not including it. On the left, 14 properties have the floodplain moving further from the structures, and that's pretty much it there. Sorry. So the impact of this revision are the four structures on the example on the left, where the floodplain is getting closer to the structure but not including it. The example on the left has the 14 properties where the structures are, the floodplain is actually moving away from them. And that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Great. We will move now to Article 41, Citizens Petition.
My name is Henry Dane. I was until recently a member of the Board of Selectmen, but now I'm still speaking for myself. I have been working for years to improve cell service in the center of Concord, and there have been many disappointments and frustrations. We really are not making very much progress in that regard. We tried to negotiate with Tricon and help the negotiations between the private parties there, because that was the one site in the center of Concord where a cell tower was permitted on the basis of a 1997 special permit from the Board of Appeals. The only other site available, according to the map that was adopted by the town meeting in 2019, was the town's public works yard on Lowell Road. For various reasons, the negotiations for the tower in Tricon did not lead anywhere, partly because Verizon, which is the dominant carrier in this area, for some reason preferred to be in the Emerson Umbrella building, and once it became a possibility that they might locate there, that was the end of the negotiations at Tricon. So the town put out an RFP for a cell tower or a cell facility in Emerson Umbrella. The RFP had many difficulties. It wasn't really all that well done. But there was one bidder that did submit a bid for it, which was Verizon. But that, strangely enough, that bid was rejected on technical grounds that really had nothing to do with their ability to provide the service, but with their non-compliance with certain things like not coming up with a plan to deal with local opposition and other things that really had nothing to do with providing the service. So but what was strange about that situation was when that RFP was put out, everyone seemed to be oblivious to the fact that Emerson Umbrella was not a location in which a cell facility was permitted by the zoning bylaw. I can hold up a map and then just tell you what it says. But if it were up there on the screen, you would see the same thing, and that is that the town meeting voted as a zoning bylaw in 2019 a map which is called, what is it called? Get the corner here. Personal Wireless Communications Facility Overlay District. And that facility overlay district included the Route 2 corridor, the Middlesex School, the town DPW, the Nurse Neck Hill, a couple of locations out on Bedford Street, and a couple of locations south of Route 2. Nothing that would really help with the cell coverage in the center of town. So there are still many difficulties in getting the town to be able to deal successfully with a wireless vendor who is willing to provide us with the service that we want. A large part of that really relates to the lack of understanding that if you want to have somebody do something that is useful, you have to make it relatively easy, cheap, and safe instead of difficult and close to impossible. So the one thing that I thought I could do to help with this was to propose this zoning bylaw, which would make two very small changes to the bylaw. And I will read you the one sentence, or the two sentences, that are the ones in question. This is a section, you may have that up there. I don't have to read it to you. You can see it. But it has two features to it. One is that in order for the zoning board to make an exception to the requirements of the previous section of the bylaw, it needs to have a determination made by a professional expert that there is a gap in coverage. That is a needless, certainly a needless process in the case where it has been obvious for years that there is a gap in coverage in the cell service in Concord Center. So my first proposal is to eliminate the provision that you need expert testimony that there is a gap in coverage. And the other is that because of the 2019 map, there needs to be a statement in there that says that if there is a gap in coverage, the Zoning Board of Appeals can, subject to all the other conditions, approve a site for a cell facility that is not located on the 2019 map. And so that really, what that really results in is a great simplification of this provision, which eliminates those two obstacles, and so that the section would read, relief from general requirements. Do we have that one up there now? The board may grant relief from the general requirements contained in the previous subsection or from any location requirements imposed by the Personal Wireless Communications Facility Overlay District map, Town of Concord, et cetera, or any successor thereto where the board determines that there is a significant gap in coverage that the granted relief provides a viable means of reducing or eliminating such significant gap in coverage, and that the desired relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the neighborhood or derogating from the intent and purpose of the bylaw. In other words, the board can, if they believe, based on whatever evidence they find satisfactory, that there is a gap in coverage, they can approve a location for a wireless facility in any location that meets the other requirements. It still would be subject to not derogating from the neighborhood. It would still be subject to the historic district commissions. It would still be subject to the wetlands bylaw and whatever, but at least it would not be prohibited in a suitable location. And then once we have that in front of us, I would hope that the town management could then be more aggressive in, and more successful in pursuing the improvement of cell coverage, which has been a frustrating and disappointing situation for many years, and that we have not been able to really address properly. I would just ask one more thing. I saw something flash by in the last line of the housekeeping amendments that said something about cell towers.
Oh.
Can we go back to that slide, on the last slide on the housekeeping changes?
It's a different article. I don't think it would be relevant to what we're talking about here.
Well, it said something about an amendment as a housekeeping change that would affect the location of cell towers.
No, it was.
No.
It would only have been grammatical.
It was correcting a comma, and it was changing the word of to, or vice versa, when the other one was meant.
Oh, is it? But is that something that this would affect? No? Okay, good. So that's about it. I'll be happy to take any questions. Okay. Huh? Well, let me address that question, and this is one of the things that is one of the challenges.
That wasn't really a question, and it's 8:30.
No,
and we've still got a ton of
Let me just address
stuff.
that in the sense that Verizon, being the dominant carrier, is the carrier that most people have when they visit the town of Concord. And therefore, in terms of doing business in town, in terms of providing communications to people who are visitors and guests in the town, coverage by other carriers does not really resolve the issue that we have to deal with.
Okay, and with that, we'll move on to Article 42.
Thank you for your attention and courtesy.
Good evening. My name is Abby Flanagan, 398 Main Street. I have a real barn burner for you. Article 42, General Bylaw, Sign Bylaw Amendment. We would like to change the word additional to addition. Any questions? Seeing none. Chair?
Awesome. We're setting records all the time. With that, we'll move to Article 43, accessory uses.
Good evening. I'm Mike Lawson. I live at 1695 Lowell Road, and I'm the chairman of the Economic Vitality Committee. I have two articles to talk to you about this evening. The first, Article 43, which Elizabeth is putting up, is a zoning bylaw for accessory use in industrial districts. The actual amendment, next slide. To determine whether the town, well, you can read it. Essentially, the article is the following. If you have a manufacturing facility of some kind, like a soap manufacturer in an industrial zone, you can't sell any soap there. If you have a brewery in an industrial zone and you'd like to have hats that have Mark's Brewery on it or whatever you can't do that. So this article is to allow for the sale of accessory articles. And if you go to the next slide, goods that are complementary in purpose to the primary business, limited by existing zoning controls, and secondary in size to the primary business. So that's the intent of this article, to allow it. Next slide, please. As you can see from this slide, Concord has 5 distinct areas for zoning. Most of you probably don't know exactly where they are, but they're diverse, small-scale uses in historic buildings like Damon Mill and Bradford Mill. That's where they are. The next are just some quick slides I'd like to go through where there are maps that show where these are. I think when we come to town meeting, we will probably have these maps put in the briefing book that the moderator spoke about. But they give you a sense of where they are. And you go to the next slide. The second and then to the last slide, which is on Virginia Road. So the Economic Vitality Committee is charged with trying to help the existing businesses in our town be viable and vital. And we've heard remarks earlier this evening about how important the look and feel of the areas are that do business in town. This amendment attempts to try to help make those businesses a little bit more profitable. So examples I've already talked to you about: a soap maker selling soap, a publisher selling books, a brewery selling T-shirts. That's what this is about. So next slide. This is gives you a sense of why this makes good sense: better use of limited commercial space, flexibility, creative industries, and encourages local shopping within Concord's scale and character. So the next slide is just a picture, and then the last slide repeats the, if you go to the next one, a picture of the sort of the industrial areas, and then the last is just a repeat of Article 43. So I'm happy to take questions. Okay. Mr. Chairman, shall I move on?
Okay, yeah, we'll move on to Article 44 then.
Yes, Article 44, it appears as if it has something to do with parking, but this is really the free ice cream and puppy amendment, and I don't want you to be confused about that. So first of all, I want to say that we're amending the article. As you might have heard from one of the speakers early on in the first that Mr. Giddings presented, our original article had to do with changes in use from one business use to another business or mixed use, including residential. On further discussion with the planning board and our old committee, there were just too many unknown possibilities with putting residential in there. And I'll tell you about what those will be in a minute. So we're amending the article that we're bringing to town meeting. And so this is changes from a use of permitted businesses to a different permitted business. If you can go to the next slide, you can see the actual language. In commercial districts, a change in use from one permitted business use to another permitted business use shall not be required to provide additional parking. And I want to first address a remark that came up in Mr. Giddings' presentation. If a business changes business use from, say, a barber shop to a candy store, and they had a joint parking agreement in place, this article does not apply. The joint parking would apply, and they'd have to go to the planning board as Mr. Giddings presented. So our Article 44 as amended is just when a business goes from one permitted use, a barber shop, to a second permitted changed use, like a candy store. They don't have to go through the process of dealing with parking. Okay. Next slide. The reason that we've talked about this is, again, this helps promote the vitality of the existing businesses. It costs money when you change a business and you have to do a parking study. go to the planning board, explain that you can't come up with any additional parking, where you're going to do it, and then the planning board has to go through their process and ultimately grant waivers. So this is an existing situation that just causes our local businesses to spend money when there's nothing they can really do to affect parking spaces. Just think of the downtown, pick a store and let it change from a clothing store to a nail salon, and you have to find 5 parking spots. You're not going to find them because you can't, knock down the building next door or something like that. You can't really do it. Yet you have to go through the process. Next slide, please. There you go. So as you could imagine, these issues came up these buildings came up before we even had cars. Many of you have lived here a very long time, can remember some of the gas stations or dairies or things like that that existed. Parking is just something you can't change. So if you go to the next slide, and these are just an enumeration of some of the things we were talking about. It's expensive. It's dealing with an issue that the new business person really can't affect any change in, and it's just a waste of time. So the next slide talks about unintended consequences of the current situation. We have storefronts that stay open. If you're West Concord was mentioned earlier, Phillips, I forget what it was, fabric or, yeah. It's sat there for a long time. Coming in, if some business use wants to come in there, they'd have to go do a parking study. You're not going to find new parking spots in West Concord. They just don't exist, right? So these are some of the issues, and the next slide talks about some unintended consequences. Storefront vacancies, longer permitting process, you can read them. Next slide. So it's just a simple fix. This isn't a big deal. It's relatively small. I keep in mind also that in addition to it being one permitted use to a second permitted use, you can't change the square footage of the store. So it has to stay within the existing footprint. So the impact on parking in the area is going to be quite minimal because the size of the store hasn't changed. We're not talking about restaurants. We're talking about retail stores and personal service organizations. I'll show you one picture in the next slide, Elizabeth. This is a little detail-y, but the red is the public parking lot off Walden Street. And you can see there's not an empty spot in the joint. The yellow to the left, my left of that, is the public or the private parking that I think was mentioned earlier has to do with Gigi's, right? You can see there's lots of empty spots there, but that's not a public parking lot. And then to the right and the bottom, again, is a private parking lot. That's the post office lot. So there's lots of spots around, but not public parking. So the next slide, again, these next 3 pictures are too detailed to really put up in front of town meeting here. We'll move them to the building book, but they just try to lay out where parking is and where parking requirements are in town. And if you look at these maps, you can just see that a business coming in be told that they have to find 5 additional parking spots isn't going to happen. So why put businesses through the process of spending money and using time and to do that when there's really nothing they can do about it? So that if you can go through those maps, Elizabeth, I don't need to show them. Keep going. Keep going. One more. This is the 9-acre corners, the next one. And then go to the next slide. Here are some positive impacts: boost business and tax revenue, preserve the historic character, help support sustainability, encourage business growth, and remove regulatory hurdles. So the last slide simply repeats the Article 44 zoning change. And again, it's going from one permitted business use to a second permitted business use when there's no change in the square footage of the business. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
have Dave Garrison, 53 Middle Street. I have one question. I actually agree with the concept of if it's a small retailer going to a small retailer, because business use should be about the foot traffic. It should be about how that works as opposed to what the business actually is by like SIC code. So my question would be the nail salon comment. Having a nail salon around the corner from our house, I can tell you the amount of car traffic at that, people driving to it to go there, versus in a downtown district, it would frankly never work downtown because you wouldn't have the spaces. So my question is really, when you say business use, change in business use, I'd like to know what the definition of business use is from a legal standpoint. Maybe this is my own naivete here on what that means.
I think there are classifications of business in the zoning code. Is that correct, Elizabeth? So they are in the zoning code. Maybe what we'll do is try to see if we can put a little page about that in the briefing book so that people could see the various categories of business.
I think that would be very helpful.
That'd be helpful?
Thank you. Yeah,
Right.
very helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll try to be short this time. Is it my understanding that this amendment would allow the situation, let's say Thoreau Street, that priest cleaners decided to be a bar, that the residential hardware store next decided to be a restaurant, that Concord Provisions decides to be a restaurant?
No, it won't. It's not about restaurants. Restaurants face all kinds of additional zoning requirements that this article would be the least of their problems.
So are those permitted uses specified in the article?
Well, they're listed in the zoning,
Okay,
what
thanks.
permitted uses are. Thank you.
Carmen Reese, 52 Devon Street, Town Moderator. Just one technical observation. It is not the article that you are amending. You are making a motion under the article that's a little less in scope than what was originally proposed in the article. The article, once it gets into the warrant, never changes. That's the article. But you can make a motion under the article that is within the scope of the article but not identical. And that's what you're doing, and I've already
Approved.
given you my view that this is within the scope.
And this would be printed in the briefing book.
It would.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Robin Garrison, 53 Middle Street. Question, you say that restaurants need additional, so you're saying if it's one type to another type, but what if, so you said a barber shop to a candy store. What about a barber shop to a nail salon? There's going to be more traffic.
Well, a barber shop to a nail salon would not be a change in business use. Those are both personal services. They would be grandfathered and wouldn't even have to apply for any kind of parking change. So it's only when it goes from a business use like retail to service, service to retail, that sort of thing. So changes of a candy store to a coffee store that was selling not drinkable coffee, but beans and things like that. That's not a change in permitted business use. That's the same business use. And they would be grandfathered and would not have to apply for any kind of parking.
Okay, so, well, is there going to be language in this specifying what the same uses would be? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what is how are the categories?
Yeah, I think that's similar to the question raised earlier, and Elizabeth points out that the types of business uses are included in the zoning book, and we'll make sure that in the briefing book that's being put together, those will be specified so you'll be able to see them. So thanks, that's a good reminder to us.
Okay, and this only applies if it's private parking that needs to be in the original. Well, we were talking before, and this is where the question comes up, what the difference is between the two articles, the joint parking and the...
It's very clear. The first article has to do with joint parking arrangements between businesses. This has nothing to do with that. And if a business changes use and they had a joint parking relationship in place, the amendment that Mr. Giddings presented is the operative one. This would not apply.
But you're correct, they both apply only to private parking.
So if the previous, I just want to make sure I understand this, if the previous retail store was determined that they need so many parking spaces, and it stays the same type of business, then there's no process. They can just, you're just trying to make it
Correct. They're
easier.
grandfathered.
You're trying to make it easier for businesses to come in. Is that my
Yes,
understanding?
yes, ma'am.
So we're not talking about an entire building that is retail that becomes
No.
housing.
No.
We're not talking
Absolutely
that
not.
at all.
That
Okay.
was the point. Our original article had it going from permitted business uses to mixed use. And that, number one, really isn't the purview of the Economic Vitality Committee. Number two, there just seemed to be some complications that we couldn't really resolve without further study, so we thought it wise just to eliminate that particular component.
Okay, and that was earlier this year. Was it last town meeting or the town meeting before when you're saying, because I've been coming to meetings about this, and I can't keep up with all the changes. So when was it that you were talking about mixed use? Was it since?
Originally, when
I can answer that question. So the mixed use was proposed. The Economic Vitality Committee came forth with this as originally structured. Their Article 44 had included a component of mixed use, which they're not moving forward with at town meeting. That's the end result here. So
Okay.
they had originally proposed that it could be both, but are saying, not to put words in his mouth, but they're backing off and saying.
Okay, but that
it
was,
something that was discussed. Yes.
and this was in before?
No.
Just recently?
Just this year.
Like
This
we were
year.
talking about mixed use.
Just this year.
Yes, we
Okay.
heard comments from members of the planning board when we talked to them. We heard comments from the public at planning board meetings. And then in discussions with the planning board and in discussions with our own committee, the Economic Vitality Committee, this just seemed like not a good idea to go through with that because we just couldn't answer and be sure of the consequences of that dimension. So it
Okay,
was
well
changed.
then I thank you for taking into consideration the public's.
Sure.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for your comment.
Yes, Sven Weber, 50 Belknap. First of all, thank you for taking the mixed use out. I think I was one of the comments
were.
there. Second, on the presentation, when you showed the slides about parking, and perhaps you can bring the first slide on parking up where you have the yellow stuff. It went a little quick, but when I looked at it, I think you overstated the availability of parking on that because you had the whole public works thing shown as parking. You have driveways at Concord Academy showing as parking.
Okay,
You have
we'll read.
Concord
We'll-
Lumber showing as parking. So and it went so quick, but I spotted a lot of these parking areas that are just not parking. I would just encourage you to carefully go through that map and really determine where is actually parking or where it is not. So it can't be that Public Works Kaiser Road
Got it.
lot is actually parking.
All right, thank you.
The last thing, given this reads a little bit like a blind check wording in there because it's just, there's this scenario where with changes, nobody comes back. I'm more thinking is what is the safeguarding in case something happens, parking patterns change, where's the safeguard? Where can the town, if suddenly you realize after 10 years into this, a lot of changes in business in a certain area, the parking is getting completely out of control. Is there some safeguarding we can build in, or do we then have to go back to town meeting and change the zoning again?
I suspect you'd have to go back to town meeting.
So there's no safeguarding for something goes wrong.
I'm not sure what the safeguarding would be. Andrew?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't believe outside of going back to town meeting, there's a safeguard where you have an existing conforming business that isn't required to have parking because of, for whatever reason. There's no safeguard present now with what they're doing. They just have an existing.
No, but you're saying right now is you change from one business use to the other and you don't have to go back for parking. If you accumulate that over 10 years or 20 years in a certain area, you can have a lot of changes over time. And nobody in that time went back for review of parking.
Yeah, but that
so
doesn't exist.
That's only my thinking. Is there some kind of a mechanism where at a certain point the town can say, oops, we reached a point where this is getting out of control?
I think that's the moment where the town would have to conduct an actual parking study and determine the use of public parking. As
Okay,
it stands,
so
you know,
coming
it's-
back to my original point, I would have loved to see that parking study first. Thank you.
Tend to agree, but thank you.
Thank you.
Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. So I just want to clarify, because I pulled down this article from the website, and it says in section 4.2.3.5, in commercial districts, a change in use from a permitted business use to a combined business residence use should not be required to provide additional off-street parking. So are you striking that from the article?
We're striking mixed-use residence, yes. The article will
Combined
read
business resident.
permitted
You're
dis-
striking 4.2.3.5?
Yes.
Okay. And then it says in footnote 1, in commercial districts, a change in use from a permitted business use to another permitted business use shall not be required to provide additional parking, which is what you said, correct?
I hope so.
So if the planning board decides next year to change a business use to mixed use, combined business zoning, would they need to come back and provide additional parking, or would it be grandfathered in because it's now a change from a permitted use to another permitted use?
I'm not a member of the planning board, but I would suspect that the planning board would have to come to town meeting with some additional change in zoning if they wanted to add mixed use and residential.
Right, well, that's the plan,
you
right?
wanna
That's what
comment?
they're working on for next year. They've already
No,
started.
they're not.
Yeah, they are. I've sat in the meetings. They hired a consultant. They have a meeting scheduled and
This
right
is
after
coming
town
to you
meeting.
from the Economic Vitality Committee, and we don't have any plans next year to come back with
No,
any
not the
change.
EVC.
But this is an
No,
amendment
but I'm
sponsored by the
saying that what
EVC.
happens is, it says a permitted business use. So if mixed use becomes a permitted business use, because
But-
the planning board
but that
brought
would-
forth
sorry.
mixed use next year, therefore, it is now a permitted use, and under footnote 1, it should not require to provide additional parking, because that's what it says. Because it's now a permitted use.
Sorry, but you're glossing over the term permitted business use and just changing that. Like, it is a business use to change it from one retail location to another retail location. It is not a permitted business use. Does not become mixed use because mixed use is allowed. Mixed use is a separate thing that would have its own requirements, which we don't have yet. So that is something to discuss later as part of any mixed use plan, not as part of this change in business use discussion.
So it says permitted business use to another permitted business use. So if it becomes mixed use,
But
that's not a
you've just
permitted
changed
business
You've
use.
just changed the discussion, though. It would be like saying, this is a residential neighborhood, so when we build a commercial farm, and you've now changed the scenario. It's business use to business use, not business use to mixed use, which they've eliminated. So it's when you start throwing the word mixed use back in, that's where it leaves the scope of this article.
Okay, just want to make sure that we're covered. And then I have another question on this, that it says in here that a business use can change if it's a, sorry, I've lost my spot here. Oh, okay. It says, Article 44 says that it can, only when no new square footage is added, right? That's what you said? So it says that in the explanation, but where does that say? I saw nowhere in Article 44 that it said you don't have to apply for parking only when new square footage is added. It's not in there. Am I missing something? It's not in the bylaw itself.
So,
Because as
if
it's
you'd like me
written,
to reply?
it applies to anything regardless of size.
Yeah, I don't have it at my fingertips, but I think Elizabeth does, so I'll defer.
So I'm going to first answer a couple of people's questions regarding permitted uses. They are listed in Table 1 of the zoning bylaw. It's on page, starts on page 15. And there are, I don't have my glasses, so I'm going to guess. Extensive use, extensive uses such as forestry, greenhouses, private recreation. There's residential uses, single-family dwellings, two-family dwellings, combined business residence, which is the term mixed use. That's under residential uses. You have industrial uses, you have governmental uses. On page 16 under 4.5 starts the list of business uses. There is probably 15 categories. You have retail use, personal service shop, craft shop, residence, indoor amusement, outdoor amusement, funeral home, repair shop, veterinary kennel, and then the list goes on. Each one of those categories is a separate type of business use. Currently, there are many uses in Concord Center. They are considered legal non-conforming uses. A retail shop where Graham Nuts was a toy store. It went from one retail shop, toy store, to another retail shop selling nuts. They did not have to meet any additional parking requirements because it went from one retail use to another retail use with no square footage. Parking for a retail use, this is to the second question, is based off of square footage, one space per 250 square feet. If a retail use is going from one use to another and they aren't adding square footage, they aren't adding any requirement for additional parking. Does that answer the question?
Don't go away.
Okay, I'm still trying to figure out my question that I had before. So it says in a commercial district, a change of use from a permitted business use to another permitted business use shall not require to provide additional parking, correct?
Correct.
And then in Article 37, Mr. Giddings said that...
This is Article 44.
I know, that was 44, but my question 37, you said ask in 44 because they contradict each other.
No, they don't.
So Mr. Giddings said Article 37 requires a parking review for any change of use that relies on shared or joint parking, correct, Mark? And then you said that what I just said was correct, that if it's a change in use, that it doesn't, if it's a permitted business use to another permitted business use, you don't need additional parking, correct?
Unless there's a joint parking use, and then Article 37 applies, this one doesn't.
Okay.
Which I've said before.
Okay, so that's my confusion. Where does it say that in your article? Because to me...
It doesn't, Carol, it doesn't have to state it. They're two separate articles. And 37 quite clearly states what we talked about, joint parking, okay? Their article does not talk about joint parking whatsoever. If there was a joint parking agreement in it, then it has to come back to under Article 37 under that bylaw. That's what has to happen. If it's got a joint parking, it has to meet the joint parking requirements.
Maybe you should clarify that in one of the
Well,
articles, because
it's
there's
really-
a lot of confusion about it, and I think if I were a lawyer or if I were a developer, I would argue that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. So this pertains to any permitted use, so a restaurant...
Permitted business use.
A restaurant, a retail shop, an office, a nail salon, right? And you said not a mixed-use business residence, but those, like a restaurant, a retail shop, an office, and a nail salon, do you think that they have similar parking demands?
Probably not. But again, remember, no square footage change.
Well, we don't know that yet. That's what you say in the explanation, but it doesn't say it in warrant Article 44. So even if it was no square footage change, like a
Just a
restaurant, a
moment.
retail
Let's ask
shop, and an
Ms. Hughes to
office, and a nail
clarify
salon
that.
have vastly different parking requirements.
Mr. Chairman, would like me to answer that question.
Please do.
So the zoning bylaw is, I've been doing this for 33 years, and zoning bylaws are a document with multiple different sections, and each section has requirements and items in it that have to be met for that particular section. One section does not automatically override any other section. So parking requirements, there is a section 7.7, and there is a table in here. I believe it's table 4. That lists all the different uses and how parking is calculated for each one of those uses. The Article 44 deals with Graham Nutt, which is a building that takes up the whole entire property. There is no parking on site. If a use goes in there, a retail use to a retail use, that is a legal non-conforming use. They have no parking. They have no ability to provide on-site parking. Article 44, if it went from a retail use to a hair salon, which is a personal service shop, it is not a retail use, then that business to business use, they would not have to require parking. An expansion of the square footage under the parking table for retail use, that's going to change the actual requirement for parking. As I stated, retail uses is 1 space per 250 square feet. So under Article 44, a business use to a business use in the same space that is currently being occupied by a permitted business use, so long as they are not increasing the square footage and triggering a different section of the zoning bylaw, then they would not need to provide additional parking beyond what is there. There are a few properties in Concord Center. Fritz and Gigi's has a very large parking lot, but there's a few spaces behind the cheese shop. They use parking with an adjacent building. They still don't have the ability to create any additional parking. If the cheese shop were to close and a retail business went in there, so long as it was not expanding that square footage, then the parking they have, which is only a few spaces, is all the parking that they would be required to have. If you'd like me to clarify, I can add on the joint parking, the question that keeps coming up.
Go right ahead if you feel more
Okay.
clarity is necessary.
I will give everybody the perfect example, the redevelopment of the Paparazzi project. That property has a joint parking agreement based on the current zoning bylaw that allows a reduction up to 50% because there's a bank and a restaurant. They were able to take credit for joint parking for only 2 of those uses. So consequently, under the current bylaw, a restaurant, 1 parking space per 3 seats. A bank, I believe, is 1 space per 300 square feet. They were allowed to reduce the required parking for those 2 uses by 50%. That's just because the bylaw says. There's no analysis done. There's no analysis on the bank might have peak hours during the day, and the restaurant serves lunch, and they have their peak hours. So that's the difference with joint parking. All the other uses, they were required to build the required number of spaces based on whether it's number of seats because it's a restaurant or square footage if it was a retail business. So that property was required to build, I believe, a little over 200 parking spaces for just those 4 uses, because the zoning bylaw did not allow it any flexibility. If a different business use goes in there, they will have to do a parking calculation based on the table 4 in the zoning bylaw, and they will have to show that the existing parking matches the number of spaces they have in that parking lot. They would not be able to just change a use to another permitted use because they have already an existing joint parking agreement.
Okay, so with that explanation, thank you very much, Elizabeth. That was very helpful. Karma was, I forgot, the French bakery before, right? La Provence. And La Provence was a restaurant, and they left, and Karma moved in, and it's the same square footage. But Karma is, open longer, has more employees, has more customers, has a bigger takeout business, is, way busier, 10 times busier probably than La Provence. So in this scenario, it's the same square footage, and it went from a restaurant to a restaurant. So would that qualify? They wouldn't have to provide additional parking, or would they have to provide additional parking? Because it's a permitted business use.
They already didn't.
One permitted business use to another permitted business use, or I don't know, from one restaurant to another.
This article wouldn't apply to them because it's not a change in business use.
It's not a change in business use.
So it's got nothing to do with this article.
All right, so Woods Hill Table in West Concord, that was a grocery store. And then Woods Hill Table took over, and I think it's the same square footage, right?
I don't know.
But one was a grocery store and one is a restaurant. And it's a lot bigger and busier, and the hours are longer, and they have more customers
But I think you
and more
used the operative word.
employees.
I think you used the operative word there. It's bigger. It changed the square footage. So
Is it bigger?
I don't know.
I don't think it is. I think it's the same square footage. I think Woods Hill Table is the same square footage as the grocery store that was there before.
It's the same footprint, but they have some, I forget if it's basement or attic space.
I think it is bigger.
Is that and when you count square footage, do you count basement and attic space? So if I had the grocery store and it had a basement and it had an attic, but I wasn't using it, am I now, is that bigger, and does that require a parking review? Or if the new customer is using the basement and the attic, but they're not raising the roof or digging down in the basement, right? They didn't do that.
Well, this article is about when there is not a change in square footage. So your question is interesting but not relevant to this article.
Well, yes, it is, because is it a change in square footage? I mean, if you use a basement that's there and an attic's there, that's not a change in square footage. So that would be a change in business use, but not a change in square footage. So therefore, that would not be required new parking for Woods Hill Table.
I'm not sure how to answer your question.
Okay, just something to think about. These are unintended consequences I think you need to think about
I
before
doubt
we
it.
bring this article forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. We'll move on to the next article, which is number 45.
Let's see, I think I can do this just glancing backwards. Okay, fantastic. All right. No, I'm fine. Yeah. So this is Article 45. It's a zoning bylaw amendment that amends Section 10.2.3.6 of our zoning bylaw, which is the density bonus criteria for a planned residential development. So let's get right into it since it's late. So affordable housing gets generated in Concord a number of different ways. It's an amazingly complex process. We have projects that are publicly funded in whole or in part, thanks to our Affordable Housing Trust and funds that come through the Community Preservation Act funds. There are also other nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity that contribute to our publicly funded housing. We have town-owned units, that are managed by our housing authority. We also can generate new affordable housing through zoning requirements. So you've probably heard of Chapter 40B. That's the one way we don't like to create affordable housing, though, hey, if that's the only way to do it, we'll take it. We have provisions in our bylaw for mixed use that requires a certain percentage of the units be affordable. And the same thing with assisted living. The new MBTA overlay district requires 20% of the units be 80% AMI qualified units. So those are great. We have a third way that we can generate housing. And actually, I could put 40B in there, but because in a sense it's an incentive, but it's developer incentives. So if we own some town land and kind of can give them a deal on the land, then maybe that's a way to incent a developer to include affordable units, and we can make that part of the agreement. And that has been done at Finnegan Way, for example, off of Strawberry Hill Road. The final way is what we call a density bonus. So the planned residential development model that we have, which is like what you'd call cluster zoning, it has a provision that's already in the bylaw that says, hey, if you add additional affordable units, you can also build a higher number of total units on the same property. And the idea is, hey, I'll make it up in volume. I'll lose a little bit on this unit that's the affordable unit, but now I can do more market rate units. So that was the arrangement that we put in the bylaw some years ago. And if you go to the next slide, the problem is over the years, while we've gotten some generation of units out of that, we've gotten less over time. And so if you just focus in on the units, not the ones that are on town land, not the ones that are based upon our own investments that we make as a town through the housing trust, et cetera, or the ones that are strange because they're what we call alternative PRDs, they're in the limited business district and they have to come before town meeting, and as a result the developer needs to kind of put a deal on the table. The ones that are just strictly based upon let's offer a density bonus, well, you can see we've gotten 50 market rate units since 2010, and that last time we had a housing crisis. And the low income, we've gotten 2 units, and we've gotten 1 moderate. So while other parts of our activities for affordable housing are making progress, this aspect of our bylaw is sort of dormant now. In fact, I spoke to the developers that have built all these affordable units in PRDs over the past few years. And they, when I interviewed them, they said it's just too big a lift right now to be able to pay the difference for a 80% unit. We can't make it up by building more market rate units. There's just too big a gap now between the cost of building these housing and what they can charge for it at that 80% level. So now the next slide. So that's the problem, right? So what is our approach to potentially helping with this situation? It's to try to generate more affordable housing units in these PRD things without public funding, because that's the idea of the developer incentive, is not have to spend money to do this. And by doing that, we would focus the developer incentives on moderate affordable housing, not on the low-income housing. And that means that for each unit that they create, they wouldn't have to spend as much to create a unit. So we get a little bit less because we don't get a full low-income ownership unit, but right now we're not really getting them. So what we'd hope to is by reducing the threshold a bit, or increasing the income threshold a bit, and reducing the investment that the developer has to make, we give them a better incentive to actually include these, rather than just building all market rate units. Or worse, what we're seeing increasingly is shifting to a subdivision model, right? Because they just say, oh, to heck with this. We're just going to build a subdivision. And we've seen those recently. So now to go to the next slide. Why, and so that's, I've just described that. So you get up to double the density, subject to the zoning board approval, if at least 10% of the units were in this 110 to 150% of Boston area median income. Concord's current Boston area median income for our residents is about 200% of AMI. Okay, so keep going. So today, as things stand, if you have 10 or fewer units, you need to generate 1 unit to get your bonus, right? To get your let's say you have a 5-unit development and you include 1 affordable unit. Now you can do a 10-unit development with that 1 affordable unit instead of 5. Okay? If you go over 10, you now need to provide 2 units. The second unit already would be a moderate income unit. What we're doing is we're shifting it now so that the first unit would be what we call starter price housing. That's at the 110% threshold. And the latter one could be up to 150%. And of course, they could be at lower threshold tiers, but that would be the maximum. Okay, so the next slide. So that gets you these maximum unit prices that you would see here. This is the 2024 numbers. Liz Rust from our Regional Housing Service Office, thank you, RSHO. RHSO has just told me that we have new numbers. I think they increased the thresholds by about, the income thresholds by about 1.8%. So I don't think they modified this very much. Okay, keep going. We are seeing a change. It's still provisional, but a change in our affordable housing needs because of the 40Bs that went through. So as a result, we could have a much larger number, at least, of rental low-income housing being generated through these 40Bs. And the situation's fluid, as you know, with tariffs and everything else. We don't know how much of these are going to come through, but it does seem like we're making progress on that low-income front. But meanwhile, on what we call workforce housing, the moderate affordable, we have a dwindling number of units in town because of teardowns, right? The units that would be in that income range, they're turning into large houses. So, and there are no new houses being built in that income range. So the goal here, actually echoing the select board's goal listed last year, is to try to generate more workforce housing. But when you're at the moderate income level, it doesn't make sense to do that by, doing it, to pay money to these people that may be making more than some homeowners, right? So we want to do this through market incentives. So the last slide, I think, or next to last. So the wording changes are really just, 4 words. Instead of pointing at the subparagraph that says you need a low-income unit, we point at the paragraph that says starter pricing, and then for the one that used to say for moderate, at starter pricing or the whole affordable range, we say now moderate. Okay? So that's how it technically looks. It's just those 4 words. This just gives you the paragraphs that those other paragraphs point to. So you can see what starter price housing and moderate price housing is. Okay? So that's what we're proposing. Any questions?
Hi, Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap. I'm just trying to understand, like, what would this apply to MCI, for example? Like, if they decided to build housing on MCI, would this?
Well,
like,
I think I don't know what the zoning is going to eventually be. Of course, today, the zoning wouldn't support this. So I think that would be a bridge we'd cross when we come up with what is the new MCI zoning going to be. If it ends up being residential zoning, because this is only in residential districts. So, if it's a mixed use district, PRD is not a model for mixed use.
Okay.
In fact, it's likely that whatever goes in an MCI is going to be more dense, if there's a residential component. And of course, more dense from a commercial standpoint as well.
Right, so if it's mixed use, it won't apply, but if they just build all housing, it could apply.
Well, we would have to rezone, town meeting would have to rezone the area as a residential district.
Right, well, I think the intent is for MCI to rezone that
That's
anyhow,
kind of
'cause it's
outside. The
industrial.
MCI zoning is a question that I believe there's an entire committee associated with it that's been meeting and planning. It's completely outside the scope.
Yeah,
of
but I
what
mean,
we're talking
currently
about.
it's not zoned residential. I would be amazed if it was rezoned as residential, in which case it would then potentially apply. I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay, but it just has to be 100% residential, not mixed use.
The district in which a PRD can be built has to be a residential
100%
district.
residential. Okay, thank you.
Right, right.
Yes. And just to reiterate, that comment was just noting that this is not a discussion about MCI. And in the future, if anyone has any comments, please approach a microphone. Thank you.
I would like to just clarify one point. This article is talking about a planned residential development which is permitted in a residential zone district. It is the zoning that is placed on a piece of property. It has nothing to do with the type of development that gets built. So if MCI Concord was built to all residential, that does not make a difference unless the property was actually zoned a residential zoning district. So what gets built is not the same as what the zoning is that town meeting approves.
And if anyone wants to take a bet with me on whether it will be zoned residential, I'll take that bet. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on. I think we're up to the last one, right? Article 46.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Chris Sintros. I'm CEO of New England Deaconess Association. New England Deaconess Association is the sponsor of Newbury Court. And I have here Mark Bobrowski, our colleague. And I have to say it before we get started, I absolutely love seeing the names of so many residents from the past or current residents on the honored citizens list in this room. So thank you for having me, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thanks. For the record, Mark Bobrowski. My office is in Damon Mill. I'm counsel to Anita for this proposal. 25-year resident of Concord this year and a former member of the planning board. So let's go to slide 2. This is the land that we propose to rezone. It is bounded by Old Marlborough on the, looks like the east to me, and then Ornac. It's to the west of Ornac. It's about 12.1 acres. It's currently zoned RAA, which is 80,000 square feet, single-family residential. That's not particularly useful to Newbury Court, so thus the reason for the rezoning petition. There's 7 residences that are sort of deep in the trees there that you can see when you drive by, but nobody lives there. The last tenant left maybe 6 months ago from one of the houses on Old Marlborough. Access to public water, no access to existing sewer currently, but we do propose to change that somewhere in the future. And so as a result, we propose a groundwater discharge permit system. Next slide. We think that CCROD is the answer because NEDA is a licensed CCRC. It's got decades of service. I don't think a lot of people understand exactly what a CCRC is, so let me explain it. When you want to go into an assisted living facility, you have your choice. There's hundreds of them. But that's it. You go in, you pay the bill. You can't pay the bill, you leave. A CCRC is aging in place. It starts with independent living units, and then eventually you evolve into a assisted living unit. Finally, at the end of your stay there, you probably need some skilled nursing, and at that point in time, you've touched all of the components of a CCRC. CCRC has a contract for these services that more or less move you along aging in place. So they've guaranteed you a spot in an independent living room, then in an assisted living room, then in a nursing room. And at the end of the day, that contract must be submitted to EOEA, Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and it must be approved by the state. It's the combination of the contract and these three components that make a CCRC what it is. Otherwise, you're just talking about a freestanding apartment building, independent living. You'd be talking about a freestanding assisted living facility. You move on when your bill can't be paid. And skilled nursing obviously matches the assisted living model. I'm going to ask Chris to talk briefly on the next slide about NEDA's experience here as a CCRC.
Thank you. And I'll add to what Mark described. We're a not-for-profit CCRC, which is honestly the rarest and what many would say is the best-of-breed form of senior living that's offered. And that's because it's not an investment. It's about the community. It's about service. On site here, we've served the folks of Concord for 115 years. It's about 5 generations of service. We are a not-for-profit. We are a 501c3. And yes, we also pay taxes, approximately $900,000 a year, that are part of the Newbury Court budget. In addition to that, and again, as part of the long-term care commitment that we make to our residents and to the community, we have approximately over $1 million a year of unsubsidized care, which we call charity care. And folks always say, we were used to the hospital giving charity care, but we didn't know that you have charity care. Next slide, please.
The other question that we're asked most frequently as we make our rounds this spring is, why not use the existing Concord bylaw? And the simple answer is that it doesn't fit. As we're describing, a CCRC is not, it's not a 40B. I think that's the most important thing for you to realize. When I was rebuilding my house, I moved into, what is it called now, Prescott, Concord or something like that, over on the Sudbury side of town, Maynard side of town. And what I got for my monthly rent, until we moved back into the house, was a vanilla box. There was no other service associated with it. They plowed the snow, thank you very much, but we certainly didn't have a lengthy list of services. So what we're trying to do is find in the Concord zoning bylaw something which emphasizes services, and it's just not there. For example, CCRC is not mentioned in the use table, even though they've been operating the CCRC for the better part of 30, 40 years. There's no mention of independent living in the use table. Two-family is allowed only by special permit in the RAA and in the MP district, but a two-family is a vanilla box. It doesn't have service associated with it. Assisted living is not allowed in the RAA or the MP district, and they have an assisted living facility right now in the MP district. It's not an allowed use. Assisted living requires 20% affordability and doesn't really promote care aspects beyond what the state requires. Affordable assisted living is not defined. Accessory uses in the bylaw are limited and antiquated, and the PRD that Matt was just talking about requires 75% affordability if you want to build a project of any density, and that's just not tenable for a CCRC. Next slide. So the fundamental difference then is services. On the left-hand side, you'll see the column for the vanilla box. That's a 40B. In a 40B, you get your room, you get your utilities, if they're included in the rent, you get some things. I'm just remembering my experience over there on the west side of town, such as garbage pickup at night, covered parking if you wanted to pay for it. The taxes are covered. The entity pays for it out of your rent. And then on the right-hand side, those are the list of services that from day one are associated with your tenancy at a CCRC. When you come in as an independent living tenant, that's what you get. I'm going to let Chris talk about that.
Well, I certainly won't read the whole list here, but the whole point, as you can see, the first half of those set of services are there to promote lifestyle and healthy aging. They're there for dining and housekeeping and maintenance on site every day. But we do have a concierge on site 24 hours every day. We do have nurses or CNAs that can respond to emergencies. And so, that whole long list, even before you have to worry about something like memory care or something like skilled nursing, all of that is what creates a service model. And again, we're proud of our service model. The right-hand column represents 80% of our expenses, and a conventional housing model on the left would represent more like 15% of expenses.
So consider this, the average entry age to a CCRC at Newbury Court is 81, and the average resident is 86. Look at the columns. Do you want the vanilla box, or do you want the services that the CCRC offers? That costs money, and so we don't fit into the model for affordable housing that you would normally associate with a 40B. It just doesn't work. It's not the same thing. That's housing. This is care and services. That's the emphasis here. Next slide. Just a couple of things to do some housekeeping to get you up to speed. This is an overlay district, so the property that I showed you before will have its own unique zoning, and the minute somebody applies for site plan approval, the underlying zoning and the building permit, the underlying zoning goes away. So there won't be a conflict between somebody building a single-family house next to the CCRC. Once the CCRC is approved, it wipes out the underlying zoning, and that's typically the model you would use this is what you would do in a 40R, for example, the state's smart growth statute. Next slide. These are just some other basic provisions. The density on that parcel I showed you is 16 units an acre. We're projecting that that would yield a maximum density of 200 units. Might not be that big, but that's the math we used in order to get there. Open space is 20% of the district. I'm going to show you a slide in a second about the location. Building height for a freestanding independent living dwelling would be 35 feet. That's where it is everywhere else in town for a single-family house. But for the multi-unit buildings that we're going to propose, we've limited the building to 85 feet in height. Now, Newbury Court is in an MP district south of Route 2. The current height limitation in that district is 110 feet. So we did not go to 110 feet out of respect for the neighborhood. Next slide. So here's the density. It's 12.1 acres, 16 units an acre, plus or minus 200. Next slide. The density calculation matches up very nicely with the existing Newbury Court on the other side of Ornac. There's approximately 18 acres of upland. That's all wet in the back, and there's some other wetlands as well. But 18 acres, there's 301 units. If you do the math, the density per upland acre is 16 units an acre. So as I'm starting to make T-shirts, if you like Newbury Court today, you're going to like Newbury Court tomorrow. It's the same thing on the other side of the road. Next slide. The open space that we're proposing is something that was involved in discussions with the Concord Country Club. It runs along the 10th fairway, and it also comes down to where they're focused on, is that paddleball or pickleball? Whatever, it's paddleball. Okay, so we're keeping our word in the discussions that we've had with the Concord Country Club, and that's our proposal. The site plan process will ultimately make the decision, and that's the planning board's decision. Next slide. So these are preliminary concepts for the independent living units. They'll be on the perimeter of the property. And the next slide. By the way, those are from Winning Farm in Winchester. And here's preliminary concepts for the center of the site, which will feature the larger buildings. But there's a significant drop from the hill in between our property and the 10th fairway down to Ornac. So those buildings will be, they're not going to be sitting on the top of a knoll. Next slide. We also propose to handle the wastewater. There's no sewer, as I said a minute ago, with a groundwater discharge permit. That's regulated by the state. So we need a DEP groundwater discharge permit. It'll be about 40,000 gallons a day. Larry Beals from Beals Associates is here. If there are questions about that, he can take the mic and answer it when I'm done. Next slide. Parking, we counted the parking for the existing 230 independent living units at Newbury Court, came up with 154. We upped it to 1 parking space per independent living unit. That ought to suffice. Assisted living and skilled nursing will park in accordance with Table 4 of the zoning, and there's a formula in there that we should easily be able to meet. Next slide. And then lastly, we're comparing our trips mostly at peak hour with what was there before. What was there before was single family in 6 of the lots. There was also a child care facility buried back in there. And when you add it all up, we've got 120 more trips during the daily count, but daily counts don't matter in traffic. It's the peak hour that counts. And if you look at the peak hours, we're -15 in the AM peak, -14 for exiting, -18 in the evening for entering, and -17 total. So it'll be roughly the same traffic that was there when there were 7 houses in the child care center. Not going to be a great deal different. Next slide. So when we started this process, we knew that we were going to get, we knew we were going to have to answer 3 questions. One was design, one was traffic, and the third one turned out to be the most important, and that's affordability, which we are preferring to call attainability. Attainable housing is a new term, but there are many jurisdictions across the country that have turned to this. Montgomery County, Maryland, one of the most progressive jurisdictions in the country, has a manual out. You can go online and read it. It's all about attainable housing. And attainable housing generally is above what would be required for a 40B, so it's not low or moderate income housing, it's middle housing. It's housing typically that is being provided for people that make a little bit more. Remember, the average entry is 81. Think of that, 81. So who are we dealing with? We're dealing with people, for the most part, who are selling their houses. And now they're moving into Newbury Court. I mean, that's not everybody, but it's certainly a lot of people. And if you sell your house in Concord, you know, you have some money in that Concord is a very affluent community. So what we're proposing to do is limit this income of the people in the pool that are eligible for attainable housing to what the bylaw calls moderate priced housing. We're just saying 150%. It's the same number. 150% is moderate priced housing. We don't want to call it moderate priced housing because there are some links to affordability that throw it back into 40B world, but we are seeking to price these or cap the pool, if you will, at 150%, and also assets will be considered. Next slide. So I'm going to give it back to Chris to talk about how Newbury Court currently moves this process along in deciding how to allow for entry.
So to be blunt, as Mark mentioned, some of the affordability criteria or the attainability criteria, what we cannot do is get subsidy. So we do not have subsidy to build, and we do not have subsidy to operate for service. And so what we think about to get somebody into a modified program is the monthly fee that's charged, the entrance fee that's charged, the refundability of the entrance fee, the long-term care insurance, whether people have it or don't have it, and then ultimately Medicaid status. And so really on a case-by-case basis, all of these things need to be pulled in and assessed to create a model that not only works for that client, but a model that works for the Newbury Court budget. Next slide. So again, you know, the care and the services need to be accommodated for. It's something people don't always like to think about, but it's just a reality. Medicare is under attack, you may have noticed. Medicaid is under attack, you may have noticed. It's up to us to put the model together and to keep it moving forward so that these services are available to the community in a cohesive and consistent manner. And that's really what we do on our campus, and that is also what this expansion will help us grow. Next slide. So here's some examples of different folks over the years who have asked us for accommodations, and I won't read through any of them, but it's a way to show that we do everything we can to work with the population that's in front of us. We do everything we can to be good neighbors. And again, we do this to tie together a responsible and viable community, not just for today or not just for 5 years when we might sell, but for the long time, for the next generation, for the next 100 years.
Next slide. Oh, you want to talk about that?
So I think our final slide here is just this wonderful letter from a longtime partner and friend, Chris Schuster at Emerson Hospital, and just really appreciate her words of support. I can't say enough how much I love seeing what she wrote, which is, one, affirming our request for more continuing care retirement community, and two, just recognizing that for more than a century, Emerson and Newbury Court have been neighbors and mission-driven partners, committed and aligned to care for the community at all stages of life. And we have shared nonprofit visions, we have shared nonprofit values, and we want to continue to grow these together. So thank you for your time, and we're open to questions.
Before we go to questions, I just want to emphasize something that I skipped over, and that is that we propose to make 10% of the total unit count at the new facility attainable. So that's our commitment. Thank you. Any questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Yes. Hi, I'm Jim Jackson, 44 Old Marlborough Road. A couple observations. A lot of what you spoke about really had nothing to do with the proposal, the warrant proposal that's on the docket. And so I'd just like to say that I have some concerns about the petition, the citizens petition. When Newbury Court bought the property, we knew that some kind of expansion to their campus was going to happen. The warrant article presented by Newbury Court proposes a change in zoning of 12 acres that are currently zoned residential lots to a new zoning designation that currently doesn't exist in Concord, a continuing care retirement community overlay district. Newbury Court wants to make this change without providing any concrete plans to the town or to the neighbors. The warrant asks for zoning rules that would allow building an 85-foot structure 6 to 8 stories within 40 feet of the property line. And that doesn't designate where the property line is. That is just what they're asking for. 85 feet, 40 feet from the road. And then it says 2-story structures, 35 feet, but their setbacks can go all the way down to 15 feet. And so potentially, now, the first I've ever heard of the open space being along the 10th hole of the country club is astonishingly disappointing to me. Because basically what you did is you said, well, we have open space we have to use, let's give it to the country club, back off our requirements, and that's how we're going to use it. And no consideration was given to the other side of the property. I'm not saying that Newbury Court would do these things of putting a house 5 yards from the road or an 85-foot structure 40 feet from the road, but legally, the way this is written, they legally could. A major development of this scope and a rezoning of 12 acres of land with the potential of housing 200 people should go through a full planning process before we look at the rezoning of that land. It should have a site plan, traffic studies, lighting review, septic review, environmental impact study, impacts on surrounding properties, and all the other reviews that you would do for a development of this size. These plans should be presented to the town for comment and approval. We want to make sure the project design keeps the residential feel on the Old Marlborough Road side of the property. I urge the planning board not to endorse this citizen's petition. Say no to changing the zoning without a proper plan in place. Thank you.
Rich Feely, 347 Lexington Road. The questions I'm going to ask are ones that reflect concerns of the board of the Concord Housing Foundation, of which I'm president. First, let me say Newbury Court is a wonderful institution. I have friends there. I could only hope to get in unless they find me to fit within their 10%. But that's the problem, that we're building 200 new units here, or 150, which is going to be one of the biggest projects in town. And I am glad to see that there is a commitment to attainable. But we all know that the sticker price at Newbury Court for admission is you got to own a home in Concord and you've got to have a significant IRA. You can't do it on Social Security. And if you look at the 150% of AMI, that includes all those people who are in their peak earning years. And not a lot of people who are retired without major IRAs have that kind of monthly income. So my questions have to do with how are we going to know that Newbury Court is really housing some of our elders who really need this kind of care, but don't have that kind of capital or monthly income. So I have a number of questions I would ask. One, who judges attainability? I know you've thrown the 150% out there, but what about assets? You know, are you requiring a buy-in? How do we know how many people do remain attainable? What happens if somebody is admitted? Does attainability follow them, or does another attainable unit open up for another elder that might want to move in? These are complex questions. I don't think that Newbury Court can answer them this evening. So my final question is, do we need to do this now? I think if we could, we might answer the other gentleman's questions, have an agreement with the town that lays out the kinds of details that the questions I'd like to ask, but I don't want to keep everybody here and put Mr. Bobrowski and Mr. Sintros on the spot. Do we need to act now, or could we have a negotiation with the town that would lay out some of these procedures? And particularly, I note there's a question of could the requirement be met off-site? What do you have in mind? It might be good, I don't know. But these are questions that need to be answered, and I would hope that we could get answers before we vote on this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm unsure whether or not we can respond or...
Oh, no, please go ahead.
Okay. With regard to the first gentleman, appreciate your concerns as a direct party in interest. However, the process has to go through site plan approval at the planning board, and I'm sure they're anxious to go through that process with us. All of the items that you ticked off regarding the wastewater, the building design, the proximity to the side yard, that's all part of site plan approval, and we will be presenting detailed plans. Now think about it, it's 2025. This is not a project that's going to pop out of the ground in 2 years. It's probably more like 4 or 5 years. So we're adopting a zoning bylaw that will be utilized for the first time down the road roughly in 4 years as we go through the application process, and then building it is another thing altogether. With regard to the location of the taller buildings, I think I made a representation that they would be put in the center, away from your homes on Old Marlboro. I ran a Google Earth ruler over it the other day, and the location I saw on one of the concept plans, the closest concept plan we had, was over 600 feet. So screening can take care of some of that, but the distance is going to take care of the most of that. But we invite the process. We want to hear neighbors' comments, as we would in any large-scale development project, so that we can fit it into the neighborhood as best we can. With regard to the gentleman's comments about the attainability standards, there is an existing policy at Newbury Court today that defines an income limit and an asset limit. But again, we're 4 or 5 years away from having to implement it. I mean, in today, the market went up 2,900 points. It's going to have a huge impact on asset limitation. Who knows what happens tomorrow? So we are in a position where we can talk about assets as limited, but we don't have a specific proposal today. And it has to work for Newbury Court, because whatever they assume as a tenant, if it's a drain on them, then the other people in the building end up paying for it. You want to comment on that?
Well, the only two things I'd add is, as it relates to the height, I'd remind the group that our current site has permission up to 110 feet in medical professional. We're nowhere near that. And so we do have a history of not going anywhere near what the max is. We also, the closest real building to the old road to 9 Acre Corner, I don't know if it's 100 feet back, but it's a 3-story, and then it just gets bigger as it gets farther away. And so I hope there's some positive track record for us in town. As it relates to the attainability, there will be a lot of issues to sort of work through, but the one thing I'll just beg you all to consider is who is in the long term responsible for the care. Is it the town? Is it the state? Is it the federal government? This is an opportunity for us to strengthen a not-for-profit community-based institution. Healthcare has been under attack, let alone through the pandemic. Now we have frontline staff and nurses getting deported. People that took care of people through the pandemic are struggling. And so all of this, to Mark's point, has to be pulled together so that there is a cohesive long-term plan, not just the short-term things that are likely to come up at planning board meetings.
Thank you. Peggy Briggs, 253 Elm Street. I am on the Finance Committee. I'm not speaking for the Finance Committee, but I can certainly project some perspective from previous discussions, and especially our interest is, and many other boards' interest in commercial development and growth in town, new non-residential, single-family residential revenue. And I appreciate Chris's comment about the taxes that we have been getting from Newbury Court. And he stopped, I think, just short of committing.
No height jokes, Peggy.
And of committing that this new development also will be taxable to the town of Concord, despite the nonprofit status of Newbury Court.
That's our expectation. Yes,
Like
our
I said,
expectation.
just short of.
No, I didn't think it was an option, Peggy.
Okay, well.
You're going to talk me out of what we're paying now.
Because this is a hearing, I know it's an absolute record that we can look back to.
Yes, our expectation is that there would be taxes assessed on that site.
Thank you. That is obviously of critical importance to the town, not just the Finance Committee, but I'm sure the Select Board, et cetera. So thank you very much for that.
Of course.
And it's a great location for such kind of growth.
Thank you.
Secondly, in the past, I think at town meeting, we have passed articles where there's a site plan and, everyone thinks they're, agreeing to a certain thing, but is that, quote, slideshow part of the record? Is that part, it's not part of the zoning article. So I would like to urge that we somehow adopt the site plan, and most important, the buffer zone, the open space buffer zone, which I think is about 200 feet all along Concord Country Club, and I will convey, or whatever, that I am a member of the Concord Country Club. My husband, who's here tonight, was recently the president of the Concord Country Club, and that is obviously extremely important to the members, and I think the location is the right place to put it, but also for the neighborhood, because they can walk from Old Marlborough. I'm sure this will be required by the town to be publicly accessible, so they could actually traverse that open space from Old Marlborough down to Ornac. But I'm trying to figure out a way to embody that as a commitment on the site plan when we approve, if we approve this zoning at town meeting. And one idea I had was under the proposed 7.12.7.1 common open space article, have the shape, dimension, character, etc. Also say, as shown on the site plan presented at the hearing on April 9th, 2025, and town meeting on June, whatever night it's going to be, 2025. So those diagrams are embedded in the zoning, and when it comes to back to the planning board, you'll have that as part of the record for the town meeting.
Thank you. I'll just turn it over to the applicant, or not applicant, sorry, the, what are they, presenter?
That's all for me.
Just
Sure.
Well, thank you. Again, we don't want to step on your toes. It's your final decision under site plan review, the way I've constructed the draft. And if you choose to go along with what I've shown you as a proposal, we're not going to object. So.
Can you just say that statement again? What have we shown?
You can't talk from your seats.
I'm sorry, I missed that last statement. Can you just say that last statement again? What proposal have you presented?
It's slide maybe 5 or 6 or something along those lines. Yeah. I don't know who's running the machine. Okay, sure. Who's got the controls here? Oh, Elizabeth is. Might be 6 or 7 or 8. It's in that range. Oh, and here it is right here.
Just while that slide's getting queued up, I will share the comment about the walkability. That's one of the most exciting things about the land for us. You know, every morning we have folks, residents that walked into West Concord. We're not that far from the rail trail, and we see just a great opportunity for access and walking through West Concord.
There you go. So Elizabeth asked me a minute ago off camera whether or not Newbury Court would be willing to negotiate with the town a development agreement that would lock some of these things in as we go to town meeting. And I'm a fan of development agreements. I think it gives everybody more protection in terms of what we promised and what we can't get out of once the development agreement is in place. It's a covenant that runs with the land, and it binds us and our successors in interest to the promises that are being made in the development agreement. So we have no problem entering into that discussion. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Carmen Reese, 52 Devon Street, Town Moderator. Just a question for you. Is there an example from another community, a model of the type of overlay district that you're proposing here? And if so, I think that it could be useful for people to see that that kind of overlay district has been proposed in other places, and if you can say anything about what the experience has been with such an overlay district, it could perhaps help people see this new thing for us. So it could be useful. That's just a thought.
Unfortunately, as far as I know, and I work extensively in drafting municipal bylaws, and I'm always reading bylaws in order to get new ideas, there is no such thing. The history here is tragic. Hingham was confronted with an Erickson proposal back in 2001, 2002, with 600 units of CCRC. And they took it on because they thought that they would get safe harbor under Chapter 40B. All of the units would count, they thought. When Avalon proposed another 40B, Hingham turned them down. It went to the state, it went to DHCD. DHCD did not allow the units, all of them, to count. There were a vastly smaller number that were counted, not enough to get into safe harbor. And Avalon, I think, ended up building the project. And that was the situation from 2005 to 2017, when a new chairwoman of the Housing Appeals Committee also reached the same conclusion. So people have shied away from it, as you might well imagine. It's hard to permit CCRC under 40B, and so most of it is just done free, of any of these constraints.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Hurley-Wales. I live at 66 Old Marlborough Road, and I'll say this is my first time at a planning meeting. But here's how I'm coming to this meeting. I'm an Old Marlborough Road resident. We have many Old Marlborough Road neighbors who are here tonight. What I hear are actually two different presentations going on. One about the concept of Newbury Court, how you're trying to expand. It's interesting. We should all be so lucky to live there when we need it. And then there's the whole other discussion about how you will go about building this, where these buildings will land, where they will be erected on the land. And we're concerned on Old Marlborough about how our properties that we have our life savings into will be impacted. I hear that you've made an agreement with a golf course about how you'll protect them. And we're wondering, how are we going to be protected by buildings that can legally, given the warrant language, can be built, 85-foot building, 40 feet from the road, casting incredible shadows and impacting visually and physically in a very negative way to Old Marlborough Road residents. I understand from your presentation, and I admire the way you've gone about building other things. I know that's not maybe your taste of what you would want to do, but that's not what's in the language. You could do that, and that would very negatively impact our neighborhood and our future, our property values. We would lose our property values greatly and not be able to move into to your incredible complex that you're building. So if you could, I just don't see why we're forcing this vote right now on something that is so vague. Your presentation was detailed, but not about the warrant, about how the warrant's written. And that's what we're going to be voting on for the town. And we don't really know very much by that warrant of what's going to happen there in the end. Thank you.
I appreciate your concerns, and I think the good news tonight is that Elizabeth's suggestion that we enter into negotiations with a development agreement in mind can address most of your concerns. I'm not saying we'll agree with each other, but we can certainly put a distance from your property or Old Marlborough and the taller buildings. We can certainly show you a landscaping plan that will be in the final build-out when we propose site plan approval to the planning board. So I think you're right. I think it is a little terrifying to think that a building 85 feet tall can be 40 feet from your home. That's not our intention, never was. But now we can lock that down in a development agreement. And we'll keep you posted as those negotiations unfold, because we want you to come and vote for it when we get to town meeting. So, thank you.
Keith Bergman, 56 White Avenue, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, speaking on my own behalf. And I just begin by making a disclaimer. I'm an unabashed fan of the New England Deaconess Association. When I was town manager in Provincetown from 1990 to 2007, I was able to negotiate a deal which brought Deaconess to Provincetown and took our then town-owned nursing home and put a new nursing home together with assisted living and independent living that we didn't have. And I had to come to Concord to negotiate that deal, and that was a great experience. When I was town administrator in Littleton, which was from 2007 to 2018, we were unsuccessful in trying to get Deaconess to occupy a 20-acre site, which on the Acton town line, where ultimately a 40B went. But I can only think of how fortunate Concord is to be the home for the New England Deaconess Association. And if their business model works, I'm glad that the town will be working closely with them to to have that model expanded on the terms that Deaconess has been so successful with. I just wanted to share the further comment that what Deaconess is putting forward is not a housing project. It is a service project. And that the metric is different. If the light bulb moment is that this project doesn't do all that we would hope to do for affordable options for seniors, then how fortunate we are that the town is engaging on two once-in-a-generation exploration of opportunities, both with the reuse of MCI Concord and the adjoining Junction Village property, which was to have been earmarked for senior housing, and the so-called land use matrix initiative, which will look at all of the town's properties that are, all of the town-owned properties that are up for discussion about what those future uses should be. The Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust is working closely this year with the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, which is one of the key quasi-state agencies that supports local affordable housing trusts. And we're looking to educate ourselves and the public on how affordable housing finance works, how you can use trust funds and zoning to leverage the building of the housing that you want to have in the community. So I appreciate that Deaconess is, by inserting this citizen petition on the warrant, they're raising their hands and saying, we're ready to move forward with something, and we want to engage in a discussion with the community about the expansion of their services. And I'm glad that the town is meeting them on those terms, and if there can be a development agreement and we can all see what it looks like, and we can all be in agreement by the time we're at a town meeting. So thanks very much for the opportunity tonight to have this discussion.
Thank you, Keith.
Evening, Stu Crucell, 60 Emerson Road. Actually picking up on having a discussion with the community, I think as it's been pointed out, it's interesting that the conversation is had with the country club, but not with the neighbors. And yes, you can go before the planning board and you'll have your development plan, but it's somewhat disconcerting that that's not a conversation you're willing to have with, club members, but not with the people all sitting here are our neighbors, whose houses will be severely impacted by this. And you make two comments, one about if you love Newbury Court, you're going to love the new one. The existing one's great. I walk by it all the time with my dog. It's set fairly far back on Ornac, and the only people who look at it are in the hospital. And you build this on the Ornac side, they're sort of looking at each other. The way you described what you're building, a lot of it would be set back from Ornac, and that's nice, but not from Old Marlborough, and that's where these houses are. You drive down Ornac, nobody's going to care where that building is. You're going to care deeply where it is on Old Marlborough.
Right.
So,
Thank you for the comments. If I may, briefly, the first, it's more than the hospital. It's looking at this building. We're home to 2% of Concord's population, 350 people. The second thing I would say relative to the club and where the open space may go, we believe a main building is going to want to be placed where there's trees. And that's an important part of where we will want to, place a main building. And so I hear your comments and thank you for them, but there may be a mutually beneficial outcome of where the main building goes.
My name is Adi, and I live on 16 Old Marlborough Road. We have met before.
Yes, thank you,
Adi. And I'm here to speak on behalf of some of us. I mean, I have lived on Old Marlborough Road for about 8 years now, and I know that a lot of people there have been living there in that neighborhood for 20, 30 or more years. And, you know, part of the charm of that neighborhood is there's no commercial buildings right there, right? I mean, there's Emerson Hospital, but that's a little removed. And I think I speak on behalf of most of us when I say that it's a residential neighborhood, and if an 8-story building pops up, the neighborhood might lose its charm. So I would encourage you to consider that when you plan for placing the buildings. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. The last thing we want to do is make the neighborhood worse. We want to make the neighborhood better. No question about it.
My name is Kanwal Singh, and I live on 26 Old Marlborough Road. Right now, mine is second house from the Old Marlborough Road, and I am across the street from where you are building something. Right now, we have a look of a neighborhood, but if you build it, it will look a commercial place, and our house's value will go down, and it will be really impacted to people who live there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got two questions that I didn't get answered before. You did mention that the cottage units are going to be 3 stories.
I'm sorry, could you just...
No. 35 feet, but that would be at the peak of the roof, right?
It's generally 2.5 stories.
I'm sorry, could you also just state your name and address for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. Jim Jackson, 44 Old Marlborough Road.
Thanks.
So I guess the difference between 2 stories and 3 stories right against the road would make a pretty big difference. I'm just trying to navigate that.
The current zoning bylaw, like most towns, allows houses measured in different ways, but there's a specific way in the Concord zoning bylaw up to 35 feet. And so generally a builder will construe that to be 2.5 stories.
2.5, but
Yeah,
in your presentation, you said the cottages were 3 stories.
No, I think I said they were 35 feet, because that's what they are.
Okay. And then my other question is, can you explain why you require this rezoning now before you have a plan, rather than waiting till you go through the planning process?
Well, it's a lot of money to develop a plan, and we've done as best we can, and now we've hit pretty much the limit of what we know. So, for example, where's the planning board going to put the open space? We have to design around that. There's other factors like the groundwater discharge permit. Where's that going to go? We've got some good soils out there. Mr. Beals is here. He can answer questions about that. But that's another constraint that we have to work around. We don't know the answer. We suspect that we see a good spot, but we've got to work around that. And then we've had negotiations with the club about distances from their property. Those ended up in, let's just call them incomplete arrangements. So we don't really have all of the information that we would need in order to give you a build it tomorrow plan. That's not something that we've got. We do know the basic concepts. The townhouse buildings will be around the perimeter, and because of the drop from, you know the land as well as I do, from the 10th Fairway Hill down to the property on Ornac, that's a considerable drop. I don't remember the exact number, but it's 45 feet. So any building that's 85 feet, and we're not really proposing 85 feet, we're just capping it so that we can have some planning margin of error, is going to sit well below that hill from the for purposes of your view as well as people on Ornac and on the golf course. But I think the message for this evening is that if you've got specific concerns, we're not done talking. So just make sure that we understand what they are. And when we go through the development agreement process with the town, then we'll be happy to include those things that we can agree to. And obviously, we're going to do our best to make you happy.
I mean, you're creeping up to the mic, so I'm going to let you go, and then we'll...
I'm Mark Stackness. I live at 34 Old Marlborough Road, right across from where all this would happen. Pardon me if I'm a little jet lagged, but I've had like 8 hours of sleep in the past 3 days, and that's on airplanes. I've had a different perspective on this because pretty much I haven't gone to any of your meetings and heard that. I've just been able to read the warrant or article or whatever you call it. And my impression of it was that this article is proposing a new type of zoning. It's not, this article is proposing that Newbury Court and all the wonderful things it does for people be expanded across the street. It's very general about a new kind of zoning that's needed. Well, Newbury Court's great. I've been their neighbor for 15 years. If there were a proposal that Newbury Court have special zoning variants across the street to build something, that's one thing, but that's not what I read. All I could see was what was in the words, and this is a new kind of zoning. We have two kinds of zoning in Concord, as far as I know, business and residential. Emerson Hospital wasn't able to put a big parking lot across the street from me because it's residential. And yeah, thank you. I'm glad. Remember, I'm a little incoherent right now. There wasn't anything in the article about how Newbury Court serves disadvantaged people and seniors and progressive dementia and how they're well taken. That wasn't the article. The article was about the new kind of zoning. And I like Newbury Court and Deaconess, but I can just imagine unscrupulous people taking exactly that and saying, well, we want to do this too, and we're going to do it over here, and what's the zoning commission going to say? Oh yeah, well, we approve that new type of zoning, and they're asking for it, so I guess we can't say no, because that was proposed. It went to town meeting. The people heard good things about what's going to be built there. Why aren't we talking about something specific that's going to be across the street from me, rather than generalities, which to me seem to be completely vague, and I don't really understand the rules of Concord that well, but if town meeting says, okay, this is a new kind of zoning, and it has vague wording in it, doesn't that open up a lot of problems? Why not make this specific instead of general? And a lot of the things that were presented here were all marketing about Newbury Court, not about what this article is about. Now, I've walked through that property many times. You have some like no trespassing signs there, so I know.
Now, you know.
What's that? You took them down?
No, I'm kidding.
I came back today. I saw the whatever it was called. Oh, so that property, I was thinking, what could you do with it? Across from me, it goes up a hill. Across from Newbury Court, it goes way up a hill. I was thinking, how are seniors going to go to lunch across the street? I mean, they have to cross the street, not a big deal, but they have to walk down something that's, you probably couldn't build a road there because the gradient is just too high. I try to imagine how you would integrate that property together with the one across the street. And, you know, I'd be glad if you could, because I don't want any I don't know what you call them, access roads coming out to Old Marlboro. I used to live on Harrington Avenue and commute in toward Boston. And in the morning between 8 and 9, you can have like 40 cars waiting to turn there in front of Emerson Hospital. I'm very happy when I have to back into my driveway that I don't have to, that nobody lives in those two houses there with the big driveways, because then I would have to be thinking not only about all these cars that are coming by, but other cars coming out the other side. I don't know what the plan is there. As far as the height, I tried to be a good Concord resident. I know that Adi wants to have solar panels. I have mine, I have nothing better to do. I'm retired. I know where the sun level is, and across the street from me, because it goes up a hill, in December, starting early in December until the end of January, or somewhere in January, my solar panels don't get a lot of sun because the trees there put a shadow on them. So when I hear there's nothing specific in this plan that would prevent an 85-foot, 100, let's make it 200, across the street from me, stopping the sun, it concerns me. I haven't said anything about property values. You guys don't make your decisions on property values, right? But that's my point. You as a zoning board, I don't think should be allowing a new type of zoning because it's in a two-page warrant article that the residents of Concord can vote on. I think a new type of zoning should be a really well-planned thing you're planning, right? So again, sorry about my jet lag and incoherence, but that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, there's no one else at the mics, so... Oh my God. Okay, if people would like to talk, please stand up, because I keep thinking we're going to wrap, and then somebody's creeping up, so I just...
In the presentation, you mentioned 200 units.
Excuse me, can you just give your name and address for the record, please? Thanks.
Toro, 126 Old Marlboro. You mentioned 200 units, and you also had a very fine presentation about the really neutral traffic. Those are 200 units. How many people are going to be employed there? How many people are going to go in and out to support those high needs folks that are...
So I don't have a number right off the top of my head, but we plan to continue the concentrated staffing departments where they currently are. So I'm sort of saying one of the benefits across the street, one of the benefits of the location from us is that we will not have the need to recreate every single full department. And so I don't have the number, but it will be significantly less than whatever we use now.
Right now, per person that lives there, how many people do you have going in and out, both contractors and employees, to maintain the services?
Well, I certainly don't have the contractor number, but I think in terms of, the weekly...
But it's pretty high, isn't it?
Well, I guess sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. It depends on what we're working on, right? In terms of the full-time equivalents to run the campus, my guess is it's 160, something in that neighborhood. Maybe it's 170, something in that.
So you're talking about 200 residents and another 100 and something
that's not at all
going in and out.
That's not at all how it would work, but I hear your question.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
I just
no, I hear you.
Heard your theatrical presentation of how it will be neutral traffic-wise. I see traffic completely stopped every single weekday, and hearing that it was very funny. I had to hold from laughing. There are also a lot of other, and someone over here mentioned, this is not the only development that is happening in the area.
I think anything else development-wise has
Okay.
been touched upon, and we don't need to, it's not related to what they're talking about, so
Okay.
it's out of scope.
Fair point. I loved your talk on your, for non-for-profit and your generosity to the community. I did in the past, about 4 years ago, look into the services there, and you don't really fit into affordable housing because you're not affordable at all. It's a lot of maybe not most, because whatever, there's a lot of for-profits that are much less expensive than what you propose and that have much lower barriers to entry. So,
That's definitely true, and we are often called to help care for some of those clients when the care needs change.
And I know that you're here as a sales pitch. Seeing the presentation, I would really have appreciated a little bit more honesty and less of a sales pitch to keep things in context. Like most everyone here, I am very concerned that your very large-scale development will completely change the character of the neighborhood and will have a negative impact to traffic and other problems, and ambulances and things like that that just come by up and down Old Marlboro all the time. So in short, I urge council to reject the proposal for the new kind of zoning, because I think that this has to be vetted a little bit better.
Oh, okay, I just want to make a note, it's now 10:30, so if your comments have been touched upon in some other way, like going forward, because I see somebody else approaching the mic. Thank you for speaking, but it's just, if it's not new, I think everybody's just, yeah, so.
Understood. Jim Jackson, 44 Old Marlboro Road. One last question, and this is more for the planning board than it is for the Newbury Court folks. If the zoning gets changed, and if you are presented with a plan that you disagree with, that you don't think is the best way that this should happen, but it does fit in the legal requirements of the new zoning, can you stop it? You can say you don't like it, but legally they're following the rules. What can the planning board do if they're following the legal rules?
I know we would do the ordinary site plan reviews that would include things that people are concerned about with traffic and traffic studies and those kind of things, and I'll defer to Elizabeth of what else might be out there.
So what I can provide you is an example of the site plan review process. Oh, how's that? Okay. What happens is a site plan review application gets submitted. Not only is this bylaw, should it pass town meeting, has the requirements in this section, there is also, as I said, there's very many layers in the in the zoning bylaw. Site plan review, there's also section 11.8, which is the site plan review section. There's criteria A through H that any application that is submitted for site plan review, the planning board needs to make findings on all of those criteria from A through H. It deals with traffic, it deals with parking, it deals with waste disposal, it deals with sustainability, it deals with neighborhood compatibility, and they are required to go through each one of those site plan criteria and make a finding on why a project meets that criteria. An application comes in for site plan review. It's a negotiation, and there's a lot of conversation back and forth. Plans get revised. There may be some items that need to be addressed through a condition that the planning board feels that that condition mitigates an issue or concern or an impact to a point where it is not substantially detrimental or lowers a concern or an issue or an impact to the point where the planning board feels they can make a finding under one of those criteria in the site plan review. To give you an example, the redevelopment of Paparazzi, that was just a site plan review application through the planning board. I believe there were approximately 42 conditions on that application, from prior to site work all the way through to prior to the issuance of a final certificate of occupancy. They will need to go through and do a lighting assessment after occupancy to make sure that the lighting, which is all dark sky compliant fixtures, but does not negatively impacts residential abutters across the Assabet River. So those are all items that become conditions of a site plan approval. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I'm Jim Breslauer. I live at Newbury Court, and I'd like to first compliment you on your endurance. I'd like to just very briefly put a human face on this. In 2015, my wife was diagnosed with Parkinson's. We knew we couldn't stay in our house because of the stairs. So we looked around, and Newbury Court, got rave reviews from every elder attorney and everyone in the elder community where my wife worked in the nonprofit sector. We applied to Newbury Court in 2016, 2017, and eventually got in 2019. There was a waiting list. There's still a waiting list. There's a demand for senior housing. We moved in with our dog, 2 dogs and cats, which provided great emotional support for my wife. While there, she received physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, all in our apartment, coming up from downstairs. Those are provided by Newbury Court staff. We had personal care attendants who could come to the apartment and help her. We took Tai Chi classes there twice a week, which tremendously helped her balance and my balance. I'm still taking those Tai Chi classes. There's a pottery studio downstairs that my wife absolutely loved. When we moved in, she was able to make vases and cups. As her disease progressed, the instructor gave her a flat piece of pottery that she could paint. And this really helped her dexterity and to maintain what she could. I was part of a Parkinson's caregiver support group that helped me get through some really, really rough times. That's all provided at Newbury Court. The fitness coordinator there helped me get exercises that would strengthen my legs so that I could help lift my wife onto the bed, onto the chair, out of the chair, from the floor from when she fell. It saved my back. I really appreciated that. When her disease progressed and her dementia got too bad that I could not handle it by myself, she moved to the Gardens, which is the memory care unit, a 2-minute walk from our apartment. I could go down there every day for hours very easily, which was good for me, good for her. I could help her with her meals while she was there. There's now a spouses support group for people whose spouses are in the Gardens. We meet every Thursday for dinner to help each other. Unfortunately, my wife passed away after she'd been in Rivercrest for a little while, about 1.5 years ago. But I'm still getting lots of support there, both physically and mentally. And if I wasn't there, I don't know if I'd be here today. And so I urge you, there is a need. Let them expand.
That means a lot, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no more speakers, we need a motion and a second to close the public hearing. And do we have a second? That's and then all those in favor? Aye. Aye. That is unanimous. Thank you very much.